Welcome back to our series on the Inca Empire. Today, we're marching into the fascinating world of the Inca army, a force that built one of the largest empires in history without a single piece of iron. How did they do it? The secret wasn't just brute force. It was something far more powerful. Discipline. Let's dive into Chapter 16, Army Discipline Without Iron. Before the Incas rose to power, warfare in the Andes was often chaotic, more like ritualized brawls than organized combat. But the Incas changed the game completely. They introduced a level of organization and strategic thinking that was unprecedented in the region. Topa Inca, the emperor, was the supreme commander-in-chief, a divine leader whose authority was absolute. Below him was a structured hierarchy of generals and officers, many of whom were relatives or trusted nobles from Cusco. This created a loyal and cohesive command structure. The entire empire was organized for war. The Incas implemented a system called the Mita, which was essentially a mandatory public service system. For men of a certain age, this service often meant military duty. Every province was required to provide a quota of able-bodied men to serve in the army. This meant the Incas could raise massive armies, sometimes numbering in the tens of thousands, drawing strength from every corner of their vast territory. Imagine being a farmer one season and a soldier the next, marching hundreds of miles under the banner of the Topa Inca. This system not only provided soldiers, but also integrated conquered peoples into the state, giving them a role and a stake in the empire's success, or at least a reason not to rebel. So, you have this massive, organized army. What were they armed with? This is where it gets really interesting. The Incas were masters of their environment, and their weaponry reflected that. They didn't have iron or steel, but they made incredibly effective weapons from stone, wood, and bronze. The primary long-range weapon was the sling, or huaraca. Don't underestimate it. In the hands of a trained Inca warrior, a sling was a lethal weapon. They could hurl stones the size of a fist with incredible accuracy and force over long distances, enough to break bones or even shatter a Spanish sword, as later accounts would reveal. Before a battle, a hail of sling stones would rain down on the enemy, disrupting their formations and causing chaos. They also used bows and arrows, particularly soldiers recruited from the jungle regions of the empire, where archery was a way of life. Another key weapon was the spear or javelin, often tipped with fire-hardened wood, stone, or bronze. These could be thrown or used in close-quarters combat. As the lines closed, the Inca warriors would switch to their deadly melee weapons. One of the most iconic was the macana, a type of club. It could be a simple, heavy wooden club embedded with stone or bronze spikes, or a more sophisticated star-shaped mace head made of solid bronze or stone, mounted on a wooden shaft. A blow from one of these could easily crush a skull or shatter bones. They also used short bronze axes and daggers for the brutal, close-in fighting that followed the initial charge. For defense, Inca soldiers were lightly but effectively armored. They wore quilted cotton tunics, sometimes 2 or 3 layers thick, which were surprisingly effective at stopping arrows and cushioning blows. They carried shields made of wood and animal hide, and wore simple wooden or cane helmets, often decorated with feathers to signify their rank and unit. The goal wasn't to be a walking fortress, but to be mobile and agile in the challenging Andean terrain. But weapons are only one part of the equation. The real genius of the Inca military lay in its discipline, tactics, and logistics. Inca armies didn't just run at the enemy screaming. They marched in tight, organized formations, divided into units based on their weapon type and ethnic group. A typical army would have a vanguard of slingers and archers to harass the enemy from a distance. Then, the main body of shock troops, armed with clubs and axes, would advance in a disciplined wave to break the enemy lines. They used sound to their advantage. Before and during a battle, the air would be filled with the deafening sound of trumpets made from conch shells, panpipes, and drums. Warriors would chant and shout, creating an intimidating wall of sound designed to terrify their opponents before a single blow was struck. This was psychological warfare, pure and simple. The Incas were also masters of strategy. They would often try to avoid a direct, bloody confrontation if possible. Their first move was usually diplomacy. They would send envoys to a target kingdom, offering them gifts and the chance to join the empire peacefully. They would be allowed to keep their local leaders and customs, as long as they accepted Inca authority, paid taxes, and worshipped the Inca sun god Inti. For many smaller states, this was a tempting offer. If diplomacy failed, the Incas would use their massive numbers and logistical superiority to overwhelm their enemies. They built an incredible network of roads, the Capac, spanning over 24,000 miles. Along these roads were storehouses, called colcas, stocked with food, weapons, and supplies. This meant the Inca army could move faster and stay in the field longer than any of their rivals. They could lay siege to a city for months, simply waiting for the defenders to starve, while their own troops were well-fed and supplied. They also used clever tactics like flanking maneuvers, ambushes, and narrow mountain passes, and even diverting rivers to flood enemy positions. They understood their terrain and used it to maximum advantage. Now, let's talk more about the soldiers themselves. While the officer corps was dominated by ethnic Incas from the heartland, the vast majority of the rank-and-file soldiers were not. They were Amara, Chonka, Huanca, and dozens of other peoples who had been conquered and absorbed into the empire. This might seem like a weakness arming the people you just conquered, but the Incas turned it into a strength. These units were typically led by their own local leaders, but placed under the command of an Inca general. They were allowed to fight using their traditional weapons and styles, which fostered a sense of pride and unit cohesion. By serving in the army, these men and their communities gained a new status within the empire. Successful campaigns meant a share of the spoils and prestige. This system, while not perfect, was remarkably effective at integrating a diverse and potentially rebellious population into a single, powerful fighting force. The Inca army was a product of its environment and its culture. It was a machine built on organization, logistics, and discipline. They proved that you don't need iron to forge an empire. You need a clear vision, a strong will, and the ability to organize tens of thousands of people towards a single goal. Their military prowess allowed them to conquer a vast and difficult territory, creating the largest empire the Americas had ever seen. Their story is a powerful testament to human ingenuity and the incredible power of collective action. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Inca military. It's a truly incredible story of strategy and power. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and subscribe for more chapters from the history of the Andes. Let me know in the comments what you found most surprising about the Inca army. See you in the next video. Ever heard the saying, all roads lead to Rome? Well, in the 15th century Andes, all roads led to Cusco, the heart of the mighty Inca Empire. Today, we're diving into Chapter 7 of our series, Roads Before Armies, exploring one of the most incredible engineering feats of the ancient world, the Great Inca Road, Huayna Capac. Imagine a network stretching over 25,000 miles, from Motorán de Colombia down to Chile and Argentina. This wasn't just a collection of dirt paths. It was a sophisticated system that bound a vast and diverse empire together. The Romans had their famous roads, but what the Inca achieved, without the wheel, without draft animals like horses or oxen, and across some of the most challenging terrain on Earth, is simply they carved paths into sheer mountain cliffs, paved highways through deserts, and built stairways that climbed thousands of feet into the clouds. So, how did they do it? The construction was a monumental state-run project. The empire utilized a system of labor tax called the mita. Every able-bodied man was required to contribute work to the state for a certain period each year. These massive organized workforce, directed by imperial architects and engineers, was the engine behind the road's creation. They used simple but effective tools: bronze and stone, crowbars, hammers, and plumb bobs. They leveled ground, laid down stone paving, built retaining walls to prevent landslides, and dug drainage canals to manage water at a constant battle in the Andes. The roads were designed for one primary user, the llama caravan and the foot trail. They were typically between 3 to 13 feet wide, perfectly suited for lines of people and pack animals moving single file. But a road is only as good as its infrastructure, and the Inca were masters of logistics. Along these highways, roughly every 12 to 15 miles, they built rest stations called tambos. These weren't just simple shelters. The larger tambos were like miniature administrative centers, complete with massive storehouses, or these storehouses were filled to the brim with food like freeze-dried potatoes and jerky, clothing, weapons, and other essential supplies. For a traveler on official state business, a tambo was a lifesaver. You could find a hot meal, a place to sleep, and fresh supplies for your journey. It was the world's first and most extensive hotel and supply chain network. All government. This system was the backbone of the empire's power. It allowed the Topa Inca, the emperor, to move his armies with incredible speed. A soldier marching from Cusco could be fed and equipped from the kulkas along the way, meaning they didn't have to carry heavy supplies. This logistical advantage was crucial for conquering and controlling such a vast territory. An army could be mobilized and deployed to a rebellious province hundreds of miles away in a matter of weeks, arriving fresh and ready for battle, while the local rebels would be quickly over. The road was a tool of unification, but it was also a potent instrument of control. Crossing the deep ravines and rushing rivers of the Andes presented another huge challenge. The Inca solution was as ingenious as it was terrifying to outsiders. Suspension bridges. They wove massive cables from ichu grass, a tough Andean fiber. These cables, some as thick as a human torso, were anchored to stone towers on either side of a gorge. A platform of woven mats and wood planks was laid across the bottom cables, with 2 more cables serving as handrails. These bridges could span distances of over 150 feet, swaying gently in the wind high above the river below. The Spanish conquistadors were both amazed and terrified by them. But for the Inca, they were a routine part of travel. The local communities were responsible for maintaining these bridges, replacing the grass cables every year or two in a communal ceremony that reaffirmed their connection to the empire and to each other. Now, let's talk about the internet of the Inca Empire. How did a message get from one end of this massive territory to the other without a written language? The answer lies with the chasqui, the elite imperial messengers. These weren't just random runners. They were highly trained athletes, chosen for their speed and endurance. They operated in a relay system. Small relay stations, called chascahuasas, were built every mile or two along the main roads. A chasqui would run his leg of the relay at top speed, carrying a message, which could be oral or encoded in a kipua, complex system of knotted strings. As he approached the next station, he would blow on a conch shell trumpet to alert the next runner. The handoff was done on the move, with the incoming runner shouting the message to the fresh runner, who would immediately take off. This system was incredibly efficient. A message could travel from Cusco to Quito, a distance of over 1,200 miles, in about a week. That's a speed of nearly 150 miles a day, faster than any message could travel in Europe at the time, even on horseback. The chasqui were the lifeblood of imperial communication. They carried news of rebellions, orders from the Topa Inca, and reports from regional governors. They moved silently and swiftly, the invisible threads that stitched the fabric of the empire together. They were so vital that harming a chasqui was a capital offense. They even carried luxury goods for the emperor, like fresh fish from the coast delivered to the mountain capital of Cusco, still fresh enough to eat. So, the Cabecon was more than just a road. It was a complex, integrated system that enabled trade, communication, administration, and military conquest. It was a physical manifestation of the Incas' power and their deep understanding of their environment. It allowed them to create a unified state in one of the most fragmented and difficult landscapes on the planet. The road connected people, moved armies, and transmitted ideas. It was the artery through which the life of the empire flowed. When the Spanish arrived, they were stunned by the quality of these roads, admitting they surpassed anything found in Europe. Ironically, the very roads that held the Inca Empire together also hastened its downfall, providing the conquistadors with a clear path to march directly into its heart. The legacy of the Inca road system endures. Many of these ancient paths are still used today by Andean communities. They serve as a powerful reminder of the ingenuity and organizational genius of the Inca civilization. It proves that sometimes the most powerful weapon an empire can wield isn't a sword or a spear, but the very road its armies march upon. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this fascinating, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next chapter. We've got so much more to explore. See you next time. Did you know the mighty Inca Empire, known for its vast conquests, actually preferred peace over war? It sounds counterintuitive, right? But before a single spear was thrown, the Incas engaged in a sophisticated and often successful campaign of diplomacy. This wasn't just a simple offer of surrender or die. It was a carefully crafted strategy designed to win over hearts and minds, making submission not just a necessity, but an attractive proposition. Let's dive into Chapter 8 of our series, Diplomacy Before Battle. The Inca state was a well-oiled machine, and warfare was expensive. It cost lives, resources, and time. So, the Topa Inca and his council understood that the most efficient way to expand their empire, known as the Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters, was to avoid bloodshed whenever possible. Their primary goal was incorporation, not annihilation. They wanted new territories to become productive parts of the empire, contributing taxes, labor, and resources. A devastated land and a resentful populace were counterproductive to this grand vision. So, how did they do it? The process began long before the army even appeared on the horizon. Inca spies and officials would travel to the target region, gathering intelligence. They'd learn about the local leadership, the economy, the people's grievances, and their religious beliefs. This information was crucial for tailoring their diplomatic approach. Once the time was right, a high-ranking Inca delegation, often including a relative of the Topa Inca himself, would arrive. They didn't come with threats, at least not at first. They came bearing gifts. These weren't just simple trinkets. The Incas would offer exquisite textiles, known as cambi cloth, which was incredibly valuable and often reserved for the elite. They brought fine pottery, precious metals, and exotic goods from distant corners of the empire. This display of wealth was a powerful statement. It demonstrated the immense resources and prosperity of the Inca state, hinting at the benefits of joining it. The message was clear. Look at what we have. This can be yours too. Along with gifts came invitations to grand feasts. The Incas would host lavish celebrations for the local leaders and nobles. There would be mountains of food and rivers of chicha, a fermented corn beer that was central to social and ritual life. These feasts were more than just a party. They were a political tool. Sharing food and drink was a fundamental act of creating social bonds and reciprocity in the Andes. By accepting the Incas' hospitality, local lords were implicitly entering into a relationship with them, creating a sense of obligation. During these feasts and subsequent negotiations, the Inca ambassadors would lay out their terms. Their pitch was compelling. They promised protection from traditional enemies. For many smaller groups, constantly under threat from aggressive neighbors, this was a very attractive offer. The Inca army was the most powerful military force in the region, and its protection was a guarantee of security. They also promised prosperity. The Incas were master engineers and administrators. They would offer to build new agricultural terraces, irrigation canals, and roads, known as the Capac. These infrastructure projects would increase food production and connect the local community to the empire's vast trade network, bringing in new goods and opportunities. The Incas would introduce their efficient system of storehouses, called culcas, which held surplus food and supplies, acting as a buffer against famine and drought. This promise of stability and an end to starvation was a powerful motivator for people living in the harsh Andean environment. Furthermore, the Incas were generally tolerant of local customs and religion, at least on the surface. While they required everyone to venerate the Inca sun god, Inti, as the supreme deity, they allowed local communities to continue worshipping their own gods, or they would often take the most important local idols back to the capital, Cusco. But this was framed as an honor. The idols were kept in a special temple where they were honored alongside deities from all over the empire. But it also served as a kind of divine hostage-taking, ensuring the good behavior of the subject people. Local leaders, or Caracas, were also given a sweet deal. If they agreed to submit peacefully, they would usually be allowed to retain their positions of power and privilege. They would be incorporated into the imperial administrative structure, becoming representatives of the Inca state in their own communities. They would receive training in Cusco, be given high status, Inca wives, and enjoy the prestige and material benefits that came with being part of the imperial elite. For a local chief, this was often a much better option than risking everything in a hopeless war. They could maintain their status and deliver security and prosperity to their people. This combination of dazzling gifts, social bonding, and compelling promises was incredibly effective. Many groups across the Andes chose to accept the Inca's offer and join the empire without a fight. They weighed the costs and benefits and concluded that peaceful incorporation was the most logical path. They became part of the Tawantinsuyu, Their people were put to work on imperial projects, and their lands were integrated into the Inca system. But what happened when diplomacy failed? What if a local leader was too proud, too independent, or simply didn't believe the Inca promises? Well, that's when the velvet glove came off, and the iron fist was revealed. If the gifts were rejected and the negotiations stalled, the tone of the Inca envoys would change dramatically. The offers of friendship would be replaced with a stark ultimatum. The Inca army, which had been waiting patiently nearby, would be brought to the forefront. These were not just ragtag warriors. They were a professional, disciplined, and massive fighting force, often numbering in the tens or even hundreds of thousands. They were well fed from the imperial storehouses and armed with a variety of effective weapons. The psychological impact of seeing such a vast and organized army arrayed against them was immense. The Inca envoys would make one final offer: submit now, or face the consequences. They would point to their army and explain, in no uncertain terms, the destruction that would follow. The choice was clear: a future of prosperity within the empire, or a future of devastation outside of it. If this final threat was also rebuffed, war was inevitable, and Inca warfare was brutal and total. Their goal was to make an example of the defiant community. The battles were often one-sided, given the Incas' numerical and logistical superiority. Once the local army was defeated, the consequences were severe. The rebellious leader and his nobles were almost always executed. Their lands might be confiscated and given to more loyal subjects. A significant portion of the local population could be forcibly relocated to other parts of the empire in a policy called and settlers loyal to the Inca would be brought in to take their place. This broke up old loyalties and made future rebellions much more difficult. The story of the Chima Empire is a classic example. The Chima, on the coast of Morandai, Peru, were a powerful and wealthy state, the last major rival to the Incas. They resisted Inca expansion, and the result was a full-scale war. The Incas cleverly conquered the headwaters of the rivers that supplied the coastal Chima with fresh water, effectively cutting off their lifeblood. Faced with the psychological and military defeat, the Chima were forced to surrender. Their king was taken to Cusco, their treasures were looted, and their kingdom was absorbed. The message sent by these conquests was powerful and echoed throughout the Andes. The fate of those who resisted served as a warning to everyone else. The next time the Inca diplomats showed up with their gifts and their feasts, local leaders would remember the fate of the Chima and others who had dared to defy the empire. The threat of war, often unspoken, was always lurking behind the veneer of peaceful negotiation. So, the Inca preference for diplomacy wasn't born from a purely pacifist ideology. It was a pragmatic, highly effective, and calculated strategy. It saved resources, preserved infrastructure, and integrated new peoples into the empire with minimal friction. It was a sophisticated system of carrot and stick. The carrot was the promise of security, stability, and prosperity. The stick was the undeniable might of the Inca military machine. By mastering both diplomacy and warfare, the Incas were able to build one of the largest and most complex empires the world has ever seen in an astonishingly short period of time. It was a testament to their understanding that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a sword, but a Welchison word. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter on Inca diplomacy. It's a fascinating look at the strategic thinking behind their imperial expansion. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. See you next time. Hello and welcome back to our deep dive into the Inca Empire. Today, we're re-exploring one of the most pivotal chapters in their history: the conquest of the Sacred Valley. This wasn't just a military campaign. It was a masterclass in expansion, integration, and ideological control that laid the groundwork for their vast empire. The story begins in the 15th century, with the Incas, then a powerful but still localized kingdom based in Cusco, casting their eyes on the adjacent Urubamba Valley. This region, known to us as the Sacred Valley, was no untamed wilderness. It was a mosaic of fertile lands, home to several established and often competing ethnic groups, like the Ayar. These weren't simple farmers. They were organized societies with their own leaders, traditions, and fortifications. For the Incas, this valley was the prize. Its fertile soil, fed by the Urubamba River, was perfect for cultivating maize, a crop crucial for both state ceremonies and feeding a growing army. Controlling the valley meant securing a vital breadbasket, a strategic advantage that couldn't be overstated. The initial Inca incursions were likely a series of skirmishes and tactical battles, not one single, overwhelming invasion. They targeted key resources and strategic points, gradually weakening their rivals' ability to resist. It was a slow, methodical process of applying pressure. A classic Inca strategy of patience and persistence. What truly set the Inca expansion apart was what happened after the fighting stopped. Instead of simply crushing their defeated rivals, the Incas employed a brilliant strategy of absorption and co-option. They understood that local power structures, if managed correctly, could be an asset, not a threat. So, when they conquered a group like the Ayarmaca, they didn't typically execute the entire ruling class. Instead, they often invited the local leaders, the curacas, into the Inca system. These elites were allowed to retain a measure of their local authority and status. In return, they had to pledge loyalty to the Topa Inca, pay tribute, and contribute labor for state projects. This approach was genius. It minimized long-term resistance by giving local leaders a stake in the new imperial order. Suddenly, their own power was tied to the success of the Inca Empire. To sweeten the deal, the Incas would often arrange marriages between Inca nobility and the families of these local elites, literally binding their lineages together. The children of these unions would be raised in Cusco, educated in Inca ways, ensuring the next generation of provincial leaders was thoroughly indoctrinated into the imperial culture. This strategy of integration extended deeply into the spiritual realm. The Incas recognized that religion was the bedrock of Andean society. To violently suppress local beliefs would have guaranteed endless rebellion. So, they didn't destroy local gods and sacred sites, or what? Instead, they incorporated them into their own sprawling pantheon. They would acknowledge the power of a conquered people's deity, but they would position it within a hierarchy beneath their own supreme gods, primarily Inti, the sun god. In some cases, the physical idols or representations of these conquered gods were taken back to Cusco. This was a symbolic power move. These gods weren't destroyed. They were elders, honored guests, or, more accurately, divine hostages. Their presence in the capital served as a constant reminder to their home communities of Inca dominance. It was a spiritual guarantee of loyalty. If a province rebelled, their gods in Cusco could be punished. This religious syncretism was incredibly effective. It allowed local people to continue their traditional worship, but framed it within a larger, Inca-controlled cosmology. With political and religious control established, the Incas began to physically reshape the sacred valley, turning it into a landscape that broadcasted their power. This is where the concept of sacred landscapes becomes so important. The Incas believed that the natural world itself, rivers and rock outcroppings, was imbued with spiritual power. As they took over the valley, they didn't just build forts. They built estates, temples, and agricultural terraces that were in dialogue with the landscape. Think of sites like Pisac and Ollantaytambo. These weren't just functional settlements. They were architectural masterpieces designed to harmonize with and dominate their natural setting. The terraces flowed down the mountainsides like giant stairways, a testament to both Inca engineering and their ability to tame the wild. The stonework of their temples was often built directly into natural rock formations, blurring the line between human construction and the divine power of the earth itself. They were redefining the sacred geography of the valley. A mountain that was once the sacred apu of a local group was now also a guardian of an Inca royal estate. The Urubamba River, vital for irrigation, was recontextualized within Inca mythology. By building their monumental structures in these powerful places, the Incas were writing their story directly onto the land, overriding the older narratives of the people they had conquered. The valley became a living, breathing symbol of Inca order, power, and divine right to rule. Every terrace field and every perfectly cut stone was a declaration that this land was now, and forever, under the dominion of the sun. The conquest of the sacred valley was therefore the perfect microcosm of the Inca imperial project. It was a sophisticated blend of military force, clever political maneuvering, religious syncretism, and a profound reimagining of the landscape itself. They conquered not just the people, but their gods and their geography, integrating them all into a new, singular vision of empire centered on Cusco and the Topa Inca. This successful campaign provided the resources, the model, and the confidence for their explosive expansion across the Andes in the decades that followed. It was here, in the heart of the Urubamba, that the Inca kingdom truly became the Inca Empire. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey into the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more. See you next time. Welcome back to our series on the Inca Empire. Today, we're journeying to the empire's final frontier, the northern campaigns into what is now modern-day Ecuador. This wasn't just another expansion. It was a brutal, decades-long struggle that tested the very limits of Inca power and resilience. So, let's set the scene. By the late 15th century, the Inca, under the leadership of the great conqueror Topa Inca Yupanqui, had consolidated their rule over a vast territory. Their gaze then turned northward, toward the complex and powerful societies of Ecuador. These weren't scattered, disorganized tribes. We're talking about sophisticated confederations like the Canari, the Picchu, and the Caranqui. They had their own rich cultures, established trade networks, and most importantly, fierce armies that were not about to bow down to a foreign invader. The initial Inca advance into the southern lands of the Canari was met with immediate and ferocious resistance. The Canari were renowned warriors, and they weren't going to surrender their ancestral lands without a fight. The early battles were intense, but Topa Inca's military machine was relentless. After a series of hard-fought victories, the Canari were subdued. But instead of simply crushing them, Topa Inca employed a classic Inca strategy, a mix of force and diplomacy. He established a major administrative center to Mabamba, which he built up to rival Cusco itself. He married a Canari princess, solidifying an alliance, and began integrating Canari nobles into the imperial structure. This was a crucial move, as the Canari would later become some of the most loyal and feared soldiers in the Inca army. With the south secured, the push continued north. But the further the Inca advanced, the stiffer the resistance became. The landscape itself became an adversary. Unlike the open highlands of Peru and Bolivia, northern Ecuador was a labyrinth of steep mountains, deep gorges, and dense forests. This was not ideal terrain for the large-aid organized formations the Inca army favored. The local groups, intimately familiar with the land, used it to their advantage, employing guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and strategic retreats that frustrated the Inca war machine. When Topa Inca's son, Huayna Capac, inherited the throne, he also inherited this grinding northern war. He would spend the majority of his long reign campaigning in this region, a testament to the incredible difficulty of the conquest. The conflicts were no longer swift campaigns. They were prolonged wars of attrition, lasting years, even decades. The societies of the north, particularly the formidable Caranqui Confederation, refused to yield. They formed powerful alliances, pushing back against the Inca tide time and again. This is where we see the Inca military adapting in fascinating ways, realizing that conventional tactics were less effective here. Huayna Capac began a massive construction project, building a network of fortresses, or pucaras. Throughout the region, these weren't just simple defensive walls. They were complex military installations, strategically placed on high ridges and mountain passes. Fortresses like Cuitoloma and Pambamarca were engineering marvels designed to control key valleys, protect supply lines, and serve as launch pads for military operations. The battles fought around these fortresses were epic. Imagine thousands of warriors clashing on steep, narrow mountain trails, with slings, stones, and arrows raining down from fortified walls. The Caranqui, in particular, proved to be masters of defensive warfare. They would lure Inca forces into well-prepared kill zones, inflicting heavy casualties. One of the most famous and brutal episodes of this war was the siege of Caranqui territory. The resistance was so fierce and the losses so great that it tested Huayna Capac's resolve. According to the chronicles, the final, decisive battle took place near a lake, which would later be known as Yahuarco, or the Lake of Blood. The story goes that after a particularly bloody victory, a frustrated and enraged Huayna Capac ordered the execution of thousands of Caranqui warriors. Their bodies were supposedly thrown into the lake, turning its waters red. While the exact numbers are likely exaggerated, The legend speaks to the sheer brutality and desperation that had come to define this northern war. It was a victory, but it came at a terrible cost, leaving deep scars and a legacy of bitterness that would have consequences later on. After decades of relentless warfare, the North was finally incorporated into the Inca Empire, which now stretched from Colombia to Chile. But this wasn't a simple conquest. It was a complex process of cultural fusion. The Inca brought their language, Quechua, their sun god, Inti, and their intricate administrative system. They built roads, storehouses, and cities. Quito, the old capital of the Picchu kingdom, was transformed into a major northern hub of the empire, second only to Cusco. Huayna Capac became so attached to the region that he established his primary court in Tumba and later Quito. He married local noblewomen and had children there, including a son named Ar. This deep connection to the north created a new dynamic within the empire. For the first time, there were two major power centers: the traditional heartland of Cusco in the south, and the new, vibrant frontier of Quito in the north. The incorporation of these diverse and powerful northern cultures enriched the Inca Empire, bringing new skills, traditions, and perspectives. But it also planted the seeds of division. The old guard in Cusco grew wary of the rising influence of the north, and the favor Huayna Capac showed to his northern-born children. This simmering rivalry between the two halves of the empire would ultimately erupt into a devastating civil war between Huayna Capac's sons, Huáscar in Cusco, and Atahualpa in Quito. Right on the eve of the Spanish arrival, the northern campaigns, the empire's final and most arduous conquest, had inadvertently created the very fracture line that would help to tear it apart. The story of the northern expansion is a powerful reminder that history is never simple. It's a tale of ambition, brutal warfare, and incredible resilience, but also of adaptation, cultural exchange, and the unforeseen consequences that shape the destiny of empires. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Inca history, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. Let me know in the comments what part of Inca history you'd like to explore next. See you in the next video. Welcome back to our series on the rise and fall of the Inca Empire. Today, in Chapter 11, we journey south, following the Inca armies as they push into the challenging territories of modern-day Bolivia and Chile. This wasn't just another conquest. It was a brutal test of the empire's limits, a story of ambition confronting some of the harshest landscapes on Earth. So, grab your gear, we're heading into the high plateaus and barren deserts of the south. The southern expansion was a monumental undertaking, defined from the very beginning by extreme environmental and logistical challenges. Imagine marching an army not through rolling hills or fertile valleys, but across the Altiplano, the high Andean plateau. We're talking about altitudes over 12,000 feet, where the air is thin, the weather is volatile, and every step is a struggle. The Incas were masters of mountain logistics, their road system a marvel of engineering. But even for them, this was a new level of difficulty. Supplying a large force in this environment was a constant nightmare. Food, water, and equipment had to be transported over vast distances, through freezing nights and scorching days. The famous Inca storehouses, the colcas, were more critical here than anywhere else in the empire. They had to be meticulously planned and stocked, often years in advance of a major campaign. A single miscalculation in the supply chain could mean disaster, leaving an army stranded and starving hundreds of miles from the nearest support base. The landscape itself became a formidable enemy, draining resources and testing the endurance of even the most seasoned Inca soldiers. As the Incas advanced into the highlands around Lake Titicaca, they didn't find an empty land. This was the heartland of the Aymara kingdoms, a collection of powerful and fiercely independent senorios, or lordships. Groups like the Cola, the Lupaca, and the Packages had their own rich traditions, complex societies, and strong military forces. They were not about to bow to a new power from Cusco without a fight. The initial encounters were marked by intense conflict. The Aymara were masters of their high-altitude environment and were not intimidated by the Inca military machine. They knew the terrain, the passes, and the best places to stage an ambush. The ensuing wars were bloody and protracted, unlike some of the swifter conquests in the north. The subjugation of the Aymara kingdoms was a drawn-out affair, characterized by sieges, pitched battles, and strategic maneuvering around the vast expanse of Lake Titicaca. The Incas eventually prevailed, not just through brute force, but through a combination of military pressure, diplomacy, and strategic alliances. They would often defeat one Aymara kingdom and then offer its leaders a place within the imperial structure, turning former enemies into allies against their remaining rivals. This policy of divide and conquer was classic Inca style. Once subdued, the Aymara territories were integrated into the empire as the province of Cusco, one of the 4 great quarters of Tawantinsuyo. However, the integration was never entirely smooth, and the Aymara people retained a strong sense of their own identity, often simmering with resentment that would occasionally flare into rebellion. This region would remain a challenging and sometimes volatile part of the empire for its entire existence. Pushing further south from the Altiplano, the Inca armies descended into a completely different, yet equally unforgiving, environment. The Atacama Desert. This is the driest, non-polar desert in the world. A vast, hyper-arid landscape of sand, salt flats, and rock stretching for over 600 miles. For the Inca war machine, which relied heavily on llama caravans for transport, the Atacama was a logistical nightmare. Water was the most precious commodity, and sources were few and far between. Crossing the desert required precise knowledge of the locations of oases and springs, knowledge that was jealously guarded by the local peoples. The inhabitants of the Atacama, such as the Atacamino people, were not organized into large kingdoms like the Aymara. They lived in smaller, fortified settlements, often built around precious water sources. Their resistance was not one of large-scale battles, but of guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run raids, and a stubborn refusal to be controlled. They used their intimate knowledge of the desert to their advantage, melting away into the barren landscape after an attack, leaving the Inca forces to bake under the relentless sun. The Incas had to fight for every oasis, for every settlement. Capturing these small communities was one thing, but holding them and controlling the vast, empty spaces in between was another challenge entirely. This was a war of attrition, fought not just against the people, but against thirst, heat, and distance. Even further south, beyond the desert, the landscape changed again. The Incas entered the semi-arid valleys of central Chile, a more fertile region but one inhabited by a people who would prove to be their most implacable foes. The Mapuche were a loose confederation of agricultural communities, fiercely independent and with a formidable warrior tradition. They had no centralized state for the Incas to decapitate, no single king to defeat. Power was decentralized, meaning every community, every valley, had to be conquered individually. The Inca advanced ground to a halt here. The pivotal moment came at the Battle of the Maul River, sometime in the late 15th century. Here, a large Inca army met a combined force of Mapuche warriors. The battle was ferocious and lasted for several days. Accounts from Spanish chroniclers, based on Inca oral histories, describe a bloody stalemate. The Incas, accustomed to decisive victories, were shocked by the tenacity and military prowess of the Mapuche. They suffered heavy casualties and were unable to break the Mapuche lines. After the battle, the Inca commanders assessed the situation. The cost of pushing further south, in both soldiers and resources, was deemed too high for the potential rewards. The territory was distant, the people were hostile, and the logistical lines was stretched to their absolute breaking point. The Maul River became the de facto southern boundary of the Inca Empire. They established a series of forts and garrisons along this frontier, not to prepare for a new invasion, but to defend what they had already taken. The Mapuche had successfully resisted the most powerful empire in the Americas, a feat they would later repeat against the Spanish. The Southern Campaign marks a crucial turning point in the story of the Inca Empire. For the first time, the seemingly unstoppable expansion began to show its limits. It wasn't just a single defeat, but a combination of factors that brought the imperial advance to a standstill. First, there was environmental resistance. The extreme aridity of the Atacama and the unfamiliar forests and terrain of central Chile presented challenges that even Inca ingenuity could unfully overcome. The empire was an Andean power, and its systems were optimized for the highlands. The further it moved from its mountainous core, the less effective its logistical and military models became. Second, there was human resistance. The decentralized, fierce opposition of peoples like the Mapuche showed that the standard Inca strategy of defeating a central leadership wouldn't always work. Some societies were simply too fragmented and too stubborn to be easily absorbed. Finally, There was the simple tyranny of distance. The empire was becoming too large. The lines of communication and supply from Cusco to the southern frontier were thousands of miles long. Administering these distant, hostile territories was becoming more trouble than it was worth. The Inca leadership was pragmatic. They recognized that they had reached a point of diminishing returns. The resources required to conquer and hold the far south outweighed any potential tribute or strategic advantage. They chose to consolidate their gains, fortify their border, and focus their energies on governing the vast territories they already controlled. The southern frontier became a permanent, and sometimes tense, borderland, a clear line on the map, marking the place where the ambition of the Children of the Sun finally met its match. This moment of limitation is incredibly important. It shows us that the Inca Empire, for all its power and organization, was not a monolithic, ever-expanding blob. It was a real state, run by real people who made calculated decisions based on cost, benefit, and risk. The Southern Campaign reveals the empire not at its most glorious, but perhaps at its most realistic, facing the hard geographical and human realities that would ultimately define its final shape. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Inca's southern expansion. It's a story that reminds us that every empire has its limits. Next time, we turn our attention back towards the heart of the empire and explore the incredible systems of administration, communication, and social control that held this vast and diverse realm. Together, it's a tale of roads, runners, and regulations that is just as fascinating as any military conquest. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about the complexities of the Inca world, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. We love reading your thoughts, so leave a comment below with any questions or insights you have. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Ever wondered how an empire without writing, currency, or even wheels managed to control a territory stretching over 2,500 miles, from modern-day Colombia down to Chile? Today, we're diving into Chapter 12 of our series, Rule Through Order, Not Chaos, and exploring the incredible administrative genius of the Inca Empire. Forget what you think you know about ancient civilizations. The Inca system was a masterclass in organization, a complex web of control that was as brilliant as it was brutal. So, how did they do it? The secret wasn't chaos. It was meticulous, almost obsessive order. The foundation of the entire empire was data. That's right, data. The Inca were master census takers. Every single person in the empire, from the highest noble to the lowest farmer, was counted and categorized. They used a device called a quipu, a complex system of knotted strings, to record everything. Population numbers, crop yields, livestock counts, and even historical events. These quipu weren't just simple knots. They were a sophisticated three-dimensional code. The type of knot, its position on the string, and the color of the cord all held specific meanings. Specialized accountants, known as quipucamayokes, could read these knotted records, giving the Sapa and Kava and Paran unparalleled real-time understanding of his domain. Imagine a king in the 5th-10th century having access to the kind of detailed information that modern governments crave. This was the power of the keep. This constant stream of data fueled the empire's most critical engine, the Mita system. The Mita was a mandatory public service system. Since there was no currency, taxes weren't paid in gold or silver. They were paid in labor. Based on the census data, every able-bodied man was required to work for the state for a set period each year. This wasn't just random work. The state would assign people to specific tasks, based on the empire's needs. One year, you might be sent to build a section of the famous Inca Road network, which spanned over 25,000 miles. The next, you could be constructing terraces for farming on steep mountainsides, building massive stone temples in Cusco, or even serving in the army. The Mita system was the force that built the wonders of the Inca world. It was an incredibly efficient way to mobilize millions of people for colossal state projects, all without a single coin changing hands. The state, in return, would provide for the workers' needs during their service, offering food, tools, and shelter. It was a reciprocal relationship, but one where the state held all the power. But what happens when you conquer a new territory? How do you integrate a potentially rebellious population into your highly ordered system? The Inca had a clever and ruthless solution for this, a policy called MIT. This was a system of forced resettlement. After a conquest, the Inca would often uproot entire communities. They would move loyal, trusted Inca subjects into the newly conquered, hostile territory. At the same time, they would take the rebellious or untrustworthy local population and scatter them across different, established parts of the empire, far from their homeland. This policy served multiple purposes. First, it broke up local power structures and networks of resistance before they could even form. A community transplanted hundreds of miles away, surrounded by strangers speaking a different dialect, was far less likely to organize a rebellion. Second, the loyal settlers, the Mitmakuna, acted as agents of the state. They would introduce Inca culture, the Quechua language, and the worship of the sun god Inti, effectively Incaizing the region from the inside out. They were the eyes and ears of the emperor in distant lands, ensuring that the state's policies were being implemented. While incredibly effective for maintaining control, imagine the human cost. Families and entire villages were torn from their ancestral lands, their cultural identity forcibly suppressed, and their lives completely remade at the whim of a distant emperor. It was a powerful tool for social engineering and a stark reminder of the authoritarian nature of Inca rule. So, you've conquered a new land. You've recorded its population with your keep. You've put them to work through the Mita, and you've shuffled the population around with the Mitmac policy. How do you maintain day-to-day control? The answer lies in a rigid, decimal-based hierarchy. The entire population was organized into units based on the number 10. At the lowest level, the foreman was responsible for 10 households. A high-ranking official oversaw 50 households, another for 100, then 500, and so on. All the way up to a governor who ruled a province of tens of thousands. This created a clear and direct chain of command, stretching from the Topa Inca in his palace in Cusco, down to a single family unit in a remote mountain village. Every person knew who they were accountable to, and every official knew who they were responsible for. This structure made governance incredibly efficient. Orders could be passed down the chain quickly, and information, collected by local officials, could flow back up to the capital just as fast. This was all facilitated by the incredible Inca road system and a network of relay runners called chasqui. These runners could carry messages and quipu records across the empire at astonishing speeds, covering up to 150 miles a day. A message from Quito in the north could reach Cusco in the south, a distance of over 1,200 miles, in under a week. This meant the Topa Inca could respond to a rebellion, a food shortage, or any other crises with unprecedented speed. Furthermore, the Inca imposed their culture as a tool of control. The Quechua language became the official language of the empire, and the worship of the Inca sun god, Inti, was mandated. While conquered peoples were often allowed to keep their local deities, they had to accept Inti as the supreme god. The sons of conquered local leaders were often taken to Cusco, the capital. There, they were educated in Inca ways, language, and religion. They were treated well, but they were essentially high-status ostajes. When they eventually returned home to rule, they were thoroughly indoctrinated, ensuring their loyalty to the empire. This combination of administrative organization, infrastructure, forced resettlement, and cultural assimilation created a system of control that was truly remarkable for its time. It was a system built on order, not chaos, but it was an order maintained by an iron fist. The Inca Empire was a testament to what can be achieved through centralized planning and absolute control, a fascinating and cautionary tale of power and organization. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the Inca administrative machine. It really shows that there's more than one way to build an empire. If you found this fascinating, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more chapters from history. Let me know in the comments what aspect of the Inca system you find most impressive or most terrifying. See you in the next video. Welcome back to Echoes of Empires, the series where we explore the hidden mechanics of power that shaped civilizations. Today, we're diving into Chapter 13. Religion as a tool of empire. We often think of religion as a purely spiritual affair, but for many ancient empires, it was one of the most powerful political instruments they had. How did emperors and kings use faith to build, unify, and control vast and diverse populations? Let's uncover the divine strategies behind earthly power. At the heart of many imperial religious systems was a supreme deity, often a sun god. Think of Ra in Egypt, Inti for the Inca, or Sol Invictus in the later Roman Empire. Why the sun? It's universal, powerful, and predictable. It rises every day, giving light and life to everyone, regardless of who they are or where they live. By associating the emperor with the sun god, rulers elevated themselves above mere mortals. They weren't just political leaders, they were the earthly representatives of the most powerful force in the cosmos. This divine connection gave their authority an unquestionable, sacred legitimacy. Decrees weren't just laws, they were expressions of divine will. To disobey the emperor was to defy the gods themselves. This state-sponsored sun worship became the official religion, a unifying banner under which all subjects were expected to rally. But empires are, by nature, multicultural. Conquering new lands meant absorbing new peoples, each with their own local gods, goddesses, and traditions. A smart emperor knew that trying to stamp out these local beliefs would only lead to rebellion. So, instead of banning them, they used a clever strategy of religious syncretism. They allowed conquered peoples to continue worshipping their own deities. But with one crucial condition: these local gods had to be subordinated to the state as supreme deity. Your town's beloved goddess of the harvest was fine, as long as everyone acknowledged that she served the great sun god of the empire. Sometimes, local gods were even merged with imperial ones. A local thunder god might be re-identified as a regional version of the empire's main storm god. This approach was brilliant. It showed a degree of tolerance that made imperial rule more palatable, while still reinforcing the central hierarchy. Local identities were preserved, but they were now neatly integrated into the larger imperial framework. Everyone had their place in the cosmic and political order, from the smallest village shrine to the grand temple of the emperor. So how did empires make this religious system visible and tangible to the average person? Through a massive investment in religious infrastructure and public spectacle. Grand temples were constructed in the capital and major cities, architectural marvels designed to inspire awe and project the power of the state and its gods. These weren't just places of worship. They were symbols of the empire's wealth, permanence, and divine favor. Priests and priestesses, often appointed by the state, would conduct elaborate daily rituals. These weren't quiet, personal prayers. They were public performances, meticulously choreographed to demonstrate the proper relationship between humanity and the gods. And by extension, between the subjects and the emperor. Even more important were the grand imperial festivals. These were massive, empire-wide holidays, often tied to the agricultural calendar or significant events in the emperor's life, like his birthday or the anniversary of his coronation. Imagine entire cities coming to a standstill for days of parades, sacrifices, games, and feasts, all in honor of the state gods. These festivals were a masterclass in public relations. They brought people from all walks of life together, creating a shared experience and a sense of collective identity. For a brief period, a farmer from a remote province and a merchant from the capital were united in the same celebration, looking toward the same imperial symbol. It was a powerful reminder that they were all part of something much bigger than themselves. They were all subjects of a divinely ordained empire. Ultimately, all of these elements and worship, the subordination of local gods, and the spectacle of temples and festivals served a single, overarching political strategy, creating spiritual unity to reinforce political control. An empire is a difficult thing to hold together. It's a patchwork of different languages, cultures, and histories. Military force can only go so far, and it's expensive. A shared religion, however, could weave a thread of unity through this diverse tapestry. It gave everyone a common set of beliefs, a shared moral language, and a single object of ultimate loyalty that transcended their local identities. By believing in the same divine order, people were more likely to accept the political order that reflected it. Religion answered the big questions. Why are we here? What is our purpose? And for the empire, the answer was simple. You are here to serve the gods and their chosen ruler. This spiritual unity wasn't just a byproduct of imperial policy. It was the very foundation of its long-term stability. It transformed a collection of conquered territories into a cohesive, functioning state, held together not just by swords and laws, but by faith. So, when we look back at the great empires of history, we see that the line between the temple and the throne was often blurred, if it existed at all. Religion wasn't separate from politics. It was the operating system of imperial power. It provided the ultimate justification for the emperor's rule, a framework for integrating diverse peoples, and a powerful tool for fostering a sense of shared identity among millions. The most successful emperors weren't just great generals or administrators. They were also chief priests, who understood that to rule the bodies of men, you must first capture their souls. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of religion and empire. It's a fascinating look at how belief systems can be used to shape societies. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Echoes of Empires for more deep dives into the past. Let us know in the comments which empire's use of religion you find most interesting. See you next time. Welcome, bike history buffs. Today, we rejourneying back in time to the Andes Mountains to uncover what everyday life was really like for the common people of the mighty Inca Empire. It wasn't all golden temples and powerful emperors. For the vast majority, life was a story of hard work, community, and a delicate balance between security and obligation. So grab your gear, we're heading to the highlands. The Inca Empire, at its peak, was a marvel of engineering and social organization. But how did they feed a population of millions in the steep, challenging terrain of the Andes? The answer lies in one of their most incredible innovations, agricultural terraces, or Andines. These weren't just simple steps cut into the mountainside. They were sophisticated systems. Each terrace was a layered construction of earth, sand, and gravel, designed for perfect drainage and to prevent soil erosion. This allowed the Incas to turn otherwise unfarmable slopes into productive fields, maximizing every available inch of land. They could grow crops at different altitudes, from Pateos and Quinoa in the highlands to maize and coca in the lower, warmer valleys. It was a brilliant solution to a difficult environmental problem, a testament to their deep understanding of agriculture and but growing the food was only half the battle. Storing it was just as crucial. The empire's survival depended on its ability to withstand droughts, crop failures, and to feed its armies and laborers. Tosolbitis. The Incas built a massive network of storehouses, called Cook. These were strategically placed along the famous Inca road system, often on windy, cool hillsides, to keep the contents fresh. There were two main types: round ones for maize, which needed ventilation, and rectangular ones for freeze-dried potatoes, called chuno, and other durable goods. These cocas were the empire's insurance policy. In times of famine, the state would distribute food from these reserves to the people. This system created a powerful sense of security. No matter how bad the harvest was in your local community, you knew the Topa Inca storehouses would prevent starvation. So, who were the people working these terraces and filling these stores? The backbone of the Inca Empire was the common farmer, organized into family units called ailes. The ailu was the fundamental social and economic unit of Andean society long before the Incas, and the empire cleverly incorporated it into their system. Each ailu collectively owned a piece of land. A portion was for themselves, a portion was for the state, and a portion was for the sun god, Inti. This meant that every family had to dedicate a significant amount of their labor to cultivating lands that were UNT their own. This labor tax was called the mita. The mita system was the cornerstone of the Inca state. It wasn't just about farming. It was a mandatory public service system where able-bodied men were required to work for the empire for a certain number of months each year. This labor built everything we associate with the Incas. Their incredible roads, their magnificent temples, their sprawling cities like Cusco and Machu Picchu. They were miners, soldiers, messengers, and builders. While they were away on meta duty, their ailu community would help their families tend to their crops, ensuring no one was left behind. It was a system built on reciprocity and community obligation. Now, let's imagine your village has just been conquered by the expanding Inca army. What happens next? The Inca approach to conquest was pragmatic. Instead of just destroying everything, They preferred to assimilate conquered peoples into their empire. Local leaders, or curacas, were often allowed to keep their positions of power, as long as they swore loyalty to the Topa Inca. Their children would be taken to the capital Cusco to be educated in the Inca way of life. This was a clever strategy. It ensured the next generation of provincial leaders would be loyal to the empire, and it also served as a polite way of keeping hostile. For the common people, life under Inca rule was a mixed bag. On one hand, you became part of a vast, organized, and powerful empire. The Incas brought stability. They put an end to the constant warfare that had often plagued the region. They built roads that connected distant villages, facilitating trade and communication. And, as we mentioned, their food storage system provided a crucial safety net against famine. In many ways, life became more predictable and secure. However, this security came at a cost. The demands of the middle labor tax were heavy. You were now working not just for your family and your local gods, but for a distant emperor in Cusco. The state controlled many aspects of your life. Officials would inspect your household, your crops, and even dictate certain social norms. For example, the state could arrange marriages to ensure the population grew, and every household could fulfill its labor obligations. While this provided structure, it also meant a loss of personal freedom. Your life was, in large part, dedicated to the service of the state. The goods produced through the mitas, the finest textiles, made from vicuña wool, were reserved for the nobility. The rest was used to supply the army, state officials, and religious ceremonies. This redistribution network was incredibly efficient, but it also reinforced the strict social hierarchy. You worked for the empire, and the empire provided for you. But the elites always received the best of everything. There was very little social mobility. If you were born a farmer, you would almost certainly die a farmer. Your path was largely set for you from birth. This life of stability mixed with obligation defined the Inca world. It was a society that valued the collective over the individual. The Ilu community was your support system, but it also held you to your duties. The Topa Inca was your divine protector, but also your demanding master. The empire offered peace from war and freedom from starvation, but it demanded your labor and your loyalty in return. It was a complex social contract, a grand bargain struck between the rulers and the ruled. Understanding this dynamic is key to understanding the Inca Empire's incredible success and its unique character. It wasn't just built on stone and gold. It was built on the organized labor of millions, on a foundation of shared community and unwavering duty. It is a powerful reminder that the grandest empires in history are always supported by the everyday lives of ordinary people. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Inca society. I hope it gave you a new perspective on this fascinating civilization. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you do not miss our next historical adventure. Let us know in the comments what ancient civilization you'd like us to explore next. See you in the next video. Welcome back to our journey through history. Today, we delve into a chapter that seems like a paradox. The story of an empire at its absolute peak, its borders stretching further than ever before, yet teetering on the edge of a self-made cliff. This is Chapter 15. Succession without rules. Imagine building the most magnificent, sprawling palace imaginable. Every room is filled with treasures. The walls are strong, and the view is breathtaking. But there is a fatal flaw in the blueprint. No one decided who gets the keys after the master builder is gone. This was the exact predicament of our empire. It had conquered lands, amassed wealth, and created a vibrant culture. But it had completely overlooked one of the most fundamental pillars of long-term stability. A clear, undisputed system of inheritance. In many successful dynasties throughout history, succession was straightforward. The eldest son, the firstborn, typically inherited the throne. This principle, known as primogeniture, wasn't always fair, but it was predictable. It provided a clear line of authority and minimized internal conflict. But here, in our empire, no such rule existed. The throne wasn't a birthright. It was a prize to be won. The reigning emperor, a formidable leader who had overseen this massive expansion, believed in a different philosophy. He thought the most capable, the strongest, and the most cunning of his sons should rule. He didn't want a weakling on the throne just because he was born first. On the surface, this sounds like a meritocracy, a system that rewards talent. But in practice, it was a recipe for disaster. It turned a royal court into a viperous nest, and the emperor's own sons into bitter rivals. The emperor had several sons, each born to a different powerful wife, and each one a competent and ambitious young man in his own right. From a young age, they weren't raised as brothers. They were raised as competitors. Their father actively encouraged this rivalry, pitting them against each other in military campaigns and administrative tasks. He would praise one son's victory in the north, while simultaneously lauding another's shrewd governance in the south. This constant competition was meant to forge them into sharp, effective leaders. Instead, it sowed deep-seated jealousy and mistrust. Each prince began to build his own power base. He would court influential generals, form alliances with wealthy governors, and secretly gather loyal troops. The palace became a web of spies and whispers. A kind word from the emperor to one son was seen as a slight by the others. A military appointment was not just a job. It was a strategic move in a deadly game of chess. The princes learned to wear masks, feigning loyalty to their father and affection for their brothers, while secretly plotting their downfall. They knew that when their father died, it wouldn't be a peaceful transition of power. It would be a bloody free-for-all. The winner would take the throne, and the losers would likely lose their lives. In this high-stakes game, there was no second place. This fierce rivalry created deep fractures within the empire's elite. The nobility, the military, and the bureaucracy were all forced to choose sides, to place their bets on which prince they thought would emerge victorious. This divided the empire's strength. Instead of focusing on external threats or internal administration, the entire political structure was consumed by the looming succession crises. It was a poison seeping into the very foundations of the state. And so, we see the tragic irony. At the very moment the empire reached its greatest territorial extent, it was also at its most vulnerable. From the outside, it was a monolith, an unstoppable force. But on the inside, it was a house divided, being torn apart by the ambitions of its own princes. The seeds of future instability were not just sown. They were being carefully watered and cultivated within the palace walls. The emperor, in his quest to find the strongest successor, had inadvertently created the perfect conditions for a civil war. He had built an empire that was vast and powerful, but he failed to secure its future. It was a ticking time bomb, and the clock started the moment the princes realized that only one of them could sit on the throne. The empire was magnificent, but its magnificence was fragile, like a beautiful glass sculpture with a crack running right through its center. This sets the stage for the chaos to come. The question was no longer if the empire would descend into conflict, but when the stage was set, the actors were in place, and the entire realm held its breath, waiting for the final act to begin. What happens when a father's ambition for his sons turns them into mortal enemies? We'll explore the explosive consequences in our next chapter. Thanks for watching. If you're fascinated by the rise and fall of great powers, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. See you in the next video. Welcome back to our journey through the incredible history of the Inca Empire. Today, we arrive at Chapter 16, the reign of Huayna Capac and the empire's dazzling peak. If you've been following along, you know the Inca have been on an unstoppable rise. Well, under Huayna Capac, they didn't just rise, they soared to their absolute zenith. This is the story of an empire at the height of its power, a glittering spectacle of gold, stone, and sheer human will. Just moments before an unimaginable storm, Huayna Capac inherited a colossal empire from his father, Topa Inca Yupanqui, and he was determined to make it even grander. His reign marks the moment that Tavantuncio, the Inca Empire, reached its maximum territorial extent. Imagine an empire stretching nearly 3,000 miles along the spine of the Andes, from the sun-drenched coasts of modern-day Ecuador and Colombia all the way down to the forests and plains of Chile and Argentina. This wasn't just a line on a map. It was a vibrant, interconnected world of dozens, if not hundreds, of different cultures, languages, and environments, all brought under the banner of the Topa Inca. Huayna Capac pushed the northern frontiers further than any of his predecessors, securing new territories rich in resources and strategic importance. The final piece of the puzzle was snapped into place. The empire was complete, a breathtaking mosaic of mountains, jungles, and deserts, all linked back to the sacred heart of Cusco. This period wasn't just about conquering land, it was about perfecting the empire. Huayna Capac's reign was an age of incredible prosperity and monumental achievement. With the vast resources of this sprawling territory at his command, he initiated building projects that still leave us in awe today. The famous Inca road system, the Capac Own, was expanded and perfected. Think of it as the interstate highway system of the Andes. A marvel of engineering with thousands of miles of paved roads, suspension bridges, spanning terrifying gorges and storehouses called tambos, placed at regular intervals to supply armies, officials, and messengers. This network was the empire's circulatory system, pumping goods, information, and power from the heart in Cusco to the furthest limbs of the territory. Fresh fish from the coast could allegedly reach the Emperor's mountain palace in just a couple of days, a testament to the incredible efficiency of the Chasqui runner system. Beyond the roads, cities flourished. Cusco itself was further embellished, becoming a true imperial capital of unimaginable splendor. Temples were sheathed in gold. Palaces were built with stones so perfectly fitted you couldn't slide a knife blade between them, and the city hummed with the energy of a continental powerhouse. But Huayna Capac also founded new administrative centers in his conquered lands. One of the most significant was Tumabamba, in modern-day Ecuador, which he built up to rival Cusco in its magnificence. This wasn't just vanity. It was smart politics, creating a northern capital to help govern the far-flung and recently acquired territories. This era saw a flourishing of Inca art, textiles of sublime quality, and ceramics that blended imperial style with local traditions. For the average person living under Inca rule during this time, life was predictable. The state provided security and sustenance through its massive storehouse system in exchange for labor. It was a time of order, of structure, and of a shared imperial identity, presided over by a divine ruler. From the outside, and even from the inside, the Inca Empire under Huayna Capac must have seemed eternal, unshakable, a mountain range of power that would stand forever. But as we know from history, the brightest day often casts the darkest shadow. This period of unparalleled peace and prosperity was, in reality, a fragile calm before a catastrophic collapse. The very successes of the empire were planting the seeds of its own destruction. The vastness of the territory, while impressive, made it incredibly difficult to govern. Communication, even with the efficient road system, was slow. A rebellion in a distant province could take months to quell. The empire was becoming too big, too complex, for one man to rule effectively from a single center. The diversity of conquered peoples also meant that beneath the surface of Inca order, old loyalties and resentments simmered. The Inca were masters, but they were not always loved. All it would take was a moment of weakness at the center for these cracks to shatter the entire structure. This golden age was a high-wire act, and the safety net was about to be removed. The empire was stretched taut, like a drumskin, and something was about to strike it with a devastating force. A crucial factor contributing to this fragility was the location of the emperor himself. Huayna Capac spent the majority of his later years far from the traditional heartland of Cusco. He was obsessed with the northern frontier, campaigning in what is now Ecuador and southern Colombia. He had even been born in Tumabamba and developed a deep affection for the region, treating it as his de facto capital. While this made sense from a military perspective, solidifying control over new, restless territories, it had profound political consequences. His long absence created a power vacuum in Cusco. The traditional Inca nobility, the powerful families and priests who formed the bedrock of the empire's power structure, felt neglected and distant from their divine ruler. Two distinct courts began to form. The old, established one in Cusco, and Huayna Capac's new, mobile, military-focused court in the north. This geographical and political divide was dangerous. It fostered rivalries and created factions. In Cusco, one of his sons, Huascar, was being groomed as a potential successor among the traditional elite. But in the north, another brilliant and ambitious son, Atahualpa, was earning his stripes as a formidable military commander at his father's side. The stage was being set for a dynastic struggle. Then, the invisible enemy arrived. Sometime in the late 1520s, A new and terrifying disease swept down from the north, moving far faster than any army. We now believe it was smallpox, brought to the continent by the first European explorers in the Caribbean. The Inca, with no immunity, were utterly defenseless. The plague tore through the population, killing with horrifying speed and efficiency. It didn't care about status, wealth, or power, and in its devastating wake, it claimed the life of the mighty Topa Inca, Huayna Capac, and his chosen heir, Ninan. The empire, already stretched to its breaking point, was suddenly left leaderless. The sun had set on the Golden Age. The death of the emperor, far from the capital, with no clear successor, ignited the simmering rivalry between his sons, Huáscar and Cusco and Atahualpa in the north. The calm was shattered and the empire plunged into a brutal civil war, a conflict that would leave it weakened, divided, and tragically vulnerable to the handful of Spanish conquistadors who were at that very moment making their way towards the shores of this broken giant. The peak had been reached, and the fall was about to be swift and terrible. Thank you for watching this chapter of our series. The story of the Inca is a powerful reminder of how even the mightiest empires can face unforeseen challenges. If you found this history as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next episode, where we'll dive into the tragic civil war that tore the empire apart. See you next time. Imagine a vast empire, stretching thousands of miles along the Andes, connected by intricate road networks, ruled by a divine king. This was the Inca Empire, a civilization at its absolute peak. But in the early 1500s, an invisible enemy arrived, one far deadlier than any army. This enemy wasn't Spanish steel or gunpowder. It was a disease. Long before Francisco Pizarro and his conquistadors set foot in the Inca heartland, their deadliest weapon had already begun its devastating work. This is the story of how a microscopic virus brought a mighty empire to its knees. Smallpox. To us, it's a disease of the past, eradicated by modern medicine. But to the people of the Americas in the 16th century, it was an apocalyptic plague. It traveled faster than any explorer, spreading along the vibrant trade routes that were the lifeblood of the continent. From the Caribbean, it jumped to the mainland of Mexico, ravaging the Aztec Empire, and then it continued its relentless march south. It moved from village to village, person to person, a silent, unseen invader that left a trail of death and terror in its wake. By the 1520s, this horrifying disease reached the northern frontier of the Inca Empire, which is Modondea, Ecuador. The Inca people had no immunity, no understanding of what was happening. They saw their families and neighbors break out in horrific sores, suffer from raging fevers, and die in agony within days. It must have felt like the end of the world, a punishment from the gods. The social fabric began to tear. Farmers died in their fields, weavers at their looms. The intricate systems of food storage and distribution that the empire depended on started to falter. Fear and chaos began to replace order and prosperity, and the disease kept moving relentlessly towards the heart of the empire, towards the capital city of Cusco, and towards the Topa Inca himself. At his time, the ruler of the Inca Empire was Huayna Capac, a powerful and respected emperor who had spent his reign expanding and consolidating his vast territory. He was in the north, near Quito, leading his massive army and securing the empire's borders. He was the undisputed leader, the son of the sun god Inti, the center of their universe. News of the strange and deadly pestilence sweeping through his northern provinces would have certainly reached him. His messengers, running along the great Inca roads, would have brought terrifying reports of entire communities wiped out. But even for the most powerful man in the Americas, this was an enemy he could not fight. He couldn't see it. He couldn't understand it. And he couldn't stop it. Then, the unthinkable happened. The disease struck the royal court. It infected the Inca nobility, the generals, and finally, the Topa Inca himself. Huayna Capac, the great conqueror, the divine king, fell victim to smallpox. The accounts say he was struck down suddenly, his body covered in the terrifying pustules of the disease. His death, around the year 1527 or 1528, was a cataclysmic event. It wasn't just the loss of a leader, it was like the sun falling from the sky. The empire was thrown into a state of profound shock and confusion. The central pillar holding their world together had just crumbled. The tragedy didn't end there. Shortly after Huayna Capac's death, his designated heir, Ninanquiochi, also died from the same disease. This created a massive power vacuum. In the Inca system, the line of succession wasn't always a simple matter of the firstborn son inheriting the throne. The emperor would often choose his most capable son to succeed him. With both the emperor and his chosen heir dead, the question of who would rule was suddenly wide open. The invisible enemy had not only killed the king, but it also shattered the line of succession, paving the way for a conflict that would tear the empire apart from the inside. Two of Huayna Capac's other sons now stepped into the void. Huáscar and Atahualpa. They were the half-brothers with very different claims and bases of power. Huáscar was in the capital city of Cusco, the traditional center of Inca power. He had the support of the Cusco nobility, the religious establishment, and the southern part of the empire. Following the deaths of his father and older brother, he was crowned as the new Topa Inca in Cusco. For many, he was the legitimate ruler, following the established traditions. But far to the north, in Quito, was Atahualpa. He was a brilliant and ambitious military commander who had been his father's favorite and had fought alongside him for years. He controlled the empire's most powerful and experienced army, the one Huayna Capac had been leading. Atahualpa had deep connections in the northern territories and was immensely popular with the military. He saw himself as just as worthy, if not more so, to rule the empire. The northern nobility and the army encouraged him to assert his claim. What started as a political disagreement soon escalated into suspicion and outright hostility. The empire, which had once been a single, unified body under one divine ruler, was now split in two. In the south, you had Huáscar, ruling from the ancient capital of Cusco. In the north, you had Atahualpa, commanding a massive, loyal army from the newer center of Quito. It was a perfect storm for a civil war. The two brothers began a bitter struggle for control. Huáscar demanded that Atahualpa come to Cusco and pay homage to him as the rightful emperor. Atahualpa, fearing for his life and backed by his powerful generals, refused. This refusal was seen as an act of rebellion. Huáscar sent an army north to crush his brother and bring him to heel. Atahualpa, a seasoned warrior, met this challenge head-on. The result was a brutal and bloody civil war that raged across the Andes for about 5 years. This wasn't a small border skirmish. It was a total war that pitted region against region, brother against brother. The Inca armies, which had once marched together to expand the empire, were now fighting and killing each other. The great Inca roads, once symbols of unity, became pathways for warring armies. The storehouses that fed the people were raided to supply the troops. The conflict drained the empire's resources, killed hundreds of thousands of its people, and deepened the divisions that had been created by the emperor's death. Atahualpa's generals were some of the most skilled in the empire, and his armies were battle-hardened from the northern campaigns. After a series of devastating battles, Atahualpa's forces gained the upper hand. They marched south, defeating Huáscar's armies and eventually capturing Huáscar himself just outside of Cusco. Atahualpa was victorious. By 1532, he had effectively won the civil war and was the undisputed de facto ruler of a now shattered and exhausted empire. He had eliminated his rival and was on his way south to the capital, Cusco, to be formally crowned as the Topa Inca and reunite his kingdom. But it was at this exact moment, this precise point of fragile victory, that a new, even more dangerous threat appeared on the horizon. Francisco Pizarro and his small band of about 168 conquistadors landed on the northern coast of Peru. They arrived to find an empire that had just been ravaged by a deadly plague and torn apart by a catastrophic civil war. The population was decimated. The political structure was in chaos. The people were demoralized and weary of war. The Inca Empire, though vast, was internally fractured and incredibly vulnerable. Atahualpa, basking in his victory, underestimated these strange newcomers. He couldn't have known that this tiny group of men would exploit the very divisions and weaknesses that the disease and the civil war had created. The stage was set for one of history's most dramatic and tragic confrontations. The death, disease, and division of the previous years had perfectly prepared the Inca Empire for its final fall. Thank you for watching. If you found this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most pivotal moments. Let me know in the comments what you think could the Inca have survived if smallpox had UNT arrived first. See you next time. Welcome back to our series on the great empires of history. Today, we delve into Chapter 18, Civil War in the Andes, a tragic tale of ambition, betrayal, and fratricide that tore the mighty Inca Empire apart from within. This is the story of two brothers, Huáscar and Atahualpa, whose rivalry for the ultimate prize, the throne of the Topa Inca, plunged their vast realm into a devastating conflict just moments before its greatest challenge. The stage was set around 1527 with the sudden death of the great Inca emperor, Huayna Capac, and his chosen heir, Coyote. They were likely victims of a new and terrifying disease, sweeping down from the north, smallpox. Their deaths created a power vacuum that shattered the stability of the empire. The throne was now contested. In the capital city of Cusco, the traditional heartland of the Inca, the nobility crowned Huáscar as the new Topa Inca. He was a son of Huayna Capac, and from the perspective of the Cusquegan elite, he was the legitimate heir. Huáscar represented tradition, the established order, and the power of the capital. But hundreds of miles to the north, in the city of Quito, another son of Huayna Capac had different ideas. This was Atahualpa. He had spent years alongside his father on military campaigns in the northern territories, modern-day Ecuador. Unlike Huáscar, who was more of a court politician in Cusco, Atahualpa was a seasoned and brilliant military commander, beloved by the empire's most formidable generals and veteran soldiers who were stationed with him in the north. He was charismatic, ruthless, and commanded a fierce loyalty from his troops. Initially, a fragile peace existed. Atahualpa seemed to accept Huáscar's rule, sending lavish gifts and messages of loyalty to his brother in Cusco. He governed the northern regions on Huáscar's behalf. However, the court in Cusco was a place of intrigue and paranoia. Huáscar's advisors whispered in his ear, warning him that Atahualpa's power in the north was a direct threat. They saw his popularity with the army not as a strength for the empire, but as a foundation for his own ambition. They feared he was building a separate kingdom. Fueled by suspicion, Huáscar made a fateful decision. He demanded that Atahualpa travel to Cusco to pay homage in person, effectively surrendering his command and placing himself at the mercy of his brother's court. For Atahualpa, this was an impossible demand. He knew that leaving his power base in the north and traveling to Cusco was likely a death sentence. His generals warned him it was a trap. Seeing no other choice, Atahualpa refused. This act of defiance was the spark that ignited the flames of civil war. Huáscar, enraged by what he saw as open rebellion, declared Atahualpa a traitor and mobilized the armies of the southern empire. He sent his forces north to crush his half-brother and bring the rebellious province back under control. The first major clash occurred at the Battle of Riobamba. Atahualpa's forces, though initially caught off guard, were led by his brilliant and loyal generals, Quizquiz and Calcuchi. They were battle-hardened veterans of the northern campaigns. Huáscar's army, though large, was less experienced. The northern army, the Atahualpans, secured a decisive victory, a sign of the brutal efficiency that would define their campaign. The war then escalated into a full-blown, continent-spanning conflict. It wasn't just a squabble between two brothers. It was a clash of two distinct regions of the empire. The south, centered on Cusco, rallied behind Huáscar, representing the traditional Inca heartland. The north, centered on Quito and the military frontier, was fiercely loyal to Atahualpa. Loyalties were shattered village by village, family by family. The empire, which had been built on a system of reciprocal obligations and a shared identity under a divine ruler, was now forced to choose sides. Armies numbering in the tens of thousands marched across the Andes, traversing the famous Inca road system, a marvel of engineering now used to facilitate a war of self-destruction. The fighting was exceptionally brutal. Both sides committed atrocities. One particularly horrific event came after Huáscar's forces captured a key northern city. In retaliation for their disloyalty, Huáscar's commanders allegedly ordered a massacre of the local nobility loyal to Atahualpa. When Atahualpa's forces retook the region, they enacted a terrible revenge, not only on the soldiers, but also on anyone associated with Huáscar's cause. This cycle of violence poisoned the very soul of the empire. The war drained the empire's resources. At an alarming rate, storehouses of food and supplies, meant to protect the people from famine, were emptied to feed the marching armies. Farmers and laborers were conscripted into service, leaving fields untended. The The intricate administrative system that managed the vast empire began to break down under the strain. The conflict dragged on for years, with momentum shifting back and forth. Huáscar's forces managed to push north and even briefly capture Atahualpa himself. But he escaped, his legend growing among his followers who believed he had been divinely aided. The turning point came as Atahualpa's veteran generals, Quizquiz and Calcuchimac, began a relentless and brilliant march southward towards the heart of the enemy's power. Cusco itself, they outmaneuvered and systematically destroyed Huáscar's armies in a series of pitched battles. The final, decisive confrontation took place just outside the capital. In the Battle of Quipapan, Atahualpa's generals crushed the last of Huáscar's resistance and, in a stunning turn of events, captured the Topa Inca himself. With Huáscar a prisoner, the war was effectively over. Atahualpa was the undisputed victor. His generals entered the sacred city of Cusco and began a brutal purge of Huáscar's lineage and supporters. They sought to eliminate any potential rivals to Atahualpa's claim, a ruthless but common practice in Inca succession disputes. Atahualpa himself was slowly making his way south from the city of Cajamarca to be formally crowned in Cusco. Savoring his victory, he had won. He was now the sole ruler of the Tawantinsuyu, the Inca Empire. But the costs had been immense. The empire was bleeding. It had lost a significant portion of its male population. Its resources were depleted, and its social fabric was torn by hatred and division. The people were exhausted and demoralized by years of bloody conflict, and it was at this exact moment of internal weakness, in 1532, as Atahualpa rested in Cajamarca, that reports came of strange pale-skinned bearded men. Arriving on the coast, they came with strange animals, shiny armor, and weapons that spat fire and thunder. To the war-weary Inca, they were a curiosity, perhaps even an omen. Atahualpa, supremely confident after defeating his brother and commanding an army of nearly 80,000 warriors, saw little to fear from this small band of around 168 foreigners. He was the master of the Andes, the victorious Topa Inca. He was unaware that these newcomers were not just random explorers. They were the vanguard of the Spanish Empire, led by Francisco Pizarro. The Inca civil war had left the empire profoundly vulnerable. A unified, stable Inca state under a ruler like Huayna Capac would have presented an almost insurmountable challenge to Pizarro's tiny expedition. But instead, the Spanish arrived to find a realm fractured by civil war, a new ruler yet to consolidate his power, and a populace weary of conflict. Atahualpa, blinded by his recent triumph, fatally underestimated the threat they posed. The brutal war between brothers had created the perfect opening for a new and far more dangerous enemy. The weakened empire, victorious but broken, was standing on the precipice of its own destruction, completely unaware of the cataclysm that was about to unfold. Thank you for watching. This tragic prelude set the stage for one of the most dramatic conquests in human history. Join us next time as we explore the arrival of the Spanish and the fateful encounter at Cusco. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our journey through history. Hello and welcome back to our series on the Inca Empire. Today, we've reached a pivotal and tragic turning point. Chapter 19, the war ends, but too late. The long and brutal civil war, the War of the Two Brothers, has finally concluded. Smoke is clearing from the battlefields. The clash of weapons has faded into an eerie silence, and a victor has emerged from the bloody conflict. Atahualpa, the ambitious son from the north, stands triumphant. His forces, seasoned and relentless, have crushed the armies of his half-brother, Huáscar, the legitimate heir in Cusco. The decisive battle has been fought and won, and Huáscar himself is now a captive. His authority shattered, his reign cut short. Atahualpa is now, for all intents and purposes, Topa Inca, the sole ruler of the vast and powerful Inca Empire. This should be a moment of celebration, a time for the new emperor to consolidate his power, to begin the process of healing and reunification. But the victory rings hollow. It has come at a catastrophic cost. The empire, known as Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters, is now a shadow of its former self. Years of civil war have ripped through its very heart. Fields lie fallow, their farmers having been conscripted into armies or fallen in battle. Storehouses, once overflowing with food and supplies to protect against famine, have been plundered to feed the warring factions. The intricate network of roads, the veins of the empire, are damaged and littered with the ghosts of conflict. More devastating than the physical destruction is the deep division sown among the people. The empire was built on a system of loyalty, reciprocity, and a shared cosmology centered on the Topa Inca as a divine figure. But the war has shattered this unity. Loyalties are now split. The supporters of the defeated Huáscar in the southern capital of Cusco view Atahualpa not as a liberator, but as a usurper, a rebel who tore the empire apart for his own ambition. The wounds are not just physical. They are psychological, social, and spiritual. The very fabric of Inca society has been stretched to its breaking point. The empire is exhausted, teetering on the edge of collapse, a giant weakened from within, and this is the core of the tragedy. There is no time to rebuild, no time for Atahualpa to mend the broken bonds, to restock the granaries, to repair the roads, to prove his legitimacy to a skeptical populace. There is no time to transition from a wartime general to a peacetime emperor. The war has ended, but the peace is fragile, uneasy. It's not a peace of resolution, but a pause, a moment of collective exhaustion. As Atahualpa enjoys his victory from his camp in Cajamarca, basking in the thermal baths and planning his triumphal march to Cusco, he is completely unaware that the greatest threat to his empire is not from within. It is already on its shores. While the brothers were locked in their deadly struggle, strange reports had been trickling in from the coast. Reports of floating mountains on the sea, of men with hair on their faces like alpacas, wielding sticks that spat fire and thunder. These reports were largely dismissed, seen as minor distractions in the face of the all-consuming civil war. Who were these strange visitors? A handful of shipwrecked sailors? Minor curiosities. No one could have imagined the truth. They were the vanguard of the Spanish conquest, led by Francisco Pizarro. They were few in number, less than 200 men, but they possessed technology and a ruthlessness that the Inca had never encountered. Steel swords, armor, harquebuses, and, most terrifyingly, horses, animals that the people of the Andes had never seen before. So, here we are, at this precise, fleeting moment in history. The Inca Civil War is over. Atahualpa is the victor. The empire is a wounded giant, breathing a shallow, ragged breath. A moment of uneasy calm settles over the Andes. It is the calm before a storm far greater and more destructive than the one that had just passed. Atahualpa, believing he has secured his destiny, is about to face an enemy he cannot comprehend. An enemy that will exploit the very weaknesses his own victory has created. The war has ended, but it has ended too late. The stage is set for one of the most dramatic and shocking confrontations in world history. A clash of civilizations that will bring the mighty Inca Empire to its knees. The arrival of the Spanish will turn this hollow victory into a prelude to an even greater catastrophe. The story is far from over. In our next episode, we will witness this fateful encounter in Cajamarca, where two worlds collide with devastating consequences. Thank you for watching. If you're finding this series insightful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into history. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the epic saga of the Inca Empire. We're now at a pivotal moment. Chapter 20. The Shadow from the West. The year is 1527. The great Inca Empire, known as Tawantinsuyo, the land of the four quarters, is at its absolute zenith. Under the rule of the Topa Inca Huayna Capac, its dominion stretches for thousands of miles along the Andes, a testament to its military might, engineering genius, and organizational prowess. From the bustling capital of Cusco, royal roads paved with stone crisscross mountains and deserts, binding a diverse population of millions under a single, powerful authority. The empire is a marvel of human achievement, a civilization that tamed one of the world's most challenging landscapes. But as the Incas celebrated their triumphs, a new story was beginning to unfold, one that would arrive not from the familial lands of their conquered territories, but from the vast, mysterious expanse of the Western Ocean. On the northernmost fringes of the empire, along the coastal plains of what is now Ecuador. Local fishermen and traders started returning with strange and unsettling tales. They spoke of encounters at sea, not with rival rafts or familiar trading vessels, but with what they described as floating houses or even mountains gliding upon the water. These were, of course, the Spanish caravels, ships of a size and design utterly alien to the peoples of the Andes. The reports that trickled back to the regional governors were initially fragmented, almost fantastical. The messengers described men with skin as pale as mountain snow and beards that covered their faces like tangled moss. These outsiders, they said, wore clothing that shone like the sun itself, hard and impenetrable. The accounts were so bizarre, so far outside the Inca worldview, that they were often dismissed as drunken ramblings or the stuff of myths. After all, who could possibly cross the endless ocean, Mamacochia, the sacred sea, for the Inca leadership, preoccupied with the vast and complex machinery of their own empire? These whispers from the coast were little more than a distant curiosity, a minor anomaly in a world they completely dominated. But the reports became more frequent, more detailed, and more alarming. The strangest tales were not just about the men themselves, but about the creatures they brought with them. They spoke of enormous, four-legged beasts that moved with incredible speed and power, carrying the pale-skinned men on their backs. These were horses, animals completely unknown in the Americas. To the Incas, who had only the llama as a beast of burden, a horse was a terrifying and supernatural spectacle. Imagine seeing a cavalry charge for the first time, a warrior fused with a powerful, snorting beast, thundering across the land faster than any human runner. It would have seemed like a monstrous centaur, a creature of nightmare and legend. The local communities were paralyzed with a mixture of awe and terror. These were not just men, they were something more, something otherworldly. Then there was the matter of their weapons. The Incas were formidable warriors, masters of the sling, the mace, and the spear. Their armies were disciplined and vast, but the outsiders wielded weapons of a different order entirely. They carried long blades of a shining metal, sharper and stronger than anything the Incas possessed. This was steel. While the Incas were skilled metallurgists who worked with bronze, copper, and gold, their weapons couldn't compete with the resilience and deadly edge of a Toledo sword. Even more terrifying were the weapons that spoke with the voice of thunder and lightning. These were the harquebuses and cannons. The sound of gunfire alone was enough to send shockwaves of panic through experienced Inca soldiers. The smoke, the fire, the invisible projectile that could strike a man down from a distance, it was not warfare as they knew it. It was sorcery. It was the power of the gods. The combination of horse, steel, and gunpowder created an image of invincibility. These weren't just invaders. They were demons, or deities, armed with the very elements of the storm. Faced with these incredible reports, the Inca leadership in Cusco struggled to make sense of what was happening. How do you respond to a threat you can't even comprehend? The Inca worldview was deeply cyclical and spiritual. Every event, from a harvest to a battle, was interpreted through a complex web of prophecy, omens, and divine will. The arrival of these strange beings from the sea was immediately filtered through this lens. Was this the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy? The Inca creator god, Viracocha, was said to have walked the earth in human form before disappearing across the western sea, promising to one day return. He was often depicted as a bearded, fair-skinned deity. Could these be Viracocha's emissaries? Or perhaps the god himself, returning as foretold? This misinterpretation was a critical and ultimately fatal mistake. Instead of recognizing the Spaniards as mortal men with hostile intentions, many Incas, including some in positions of power, viewed them with a sense of religious awe and fatalism. This hesitation, this uncertainty about whether to fight them as men or worship them as gods, created a crucial window of opportunity for the vastly outnumbered Spanish invaders. The initial response was not one of unified, immediate military opposition, but of cautious observation, debate, and spiritual anxiety. This period marked a profound turning point for the Inca Empire. For centuries, the trajectory of the Incas had been one of relentless, outward expansion. From their humble origins in the Cusco Valley, they had conquered, assimilated, and built, always pushing their borders further. Their entire state apparatus, their social structure, and their religious beliefs were built on the foundation of constant growth and control. Now, for the first time, the threat was not coming from a rival Andean kingdom they could understand and eventually subdue. It was coming from beyond their known world. The forward momentum of the empire stalled. The confidence that had fueled their expansion began to fracture, replaced by a growing sense of uncertainty and dread. Huayna Capac, the mighty emperor, was hundreds of miles away in the north, dealing with rebellions and the administration of his vast territories. The news he received was filtered, delayed, and wrapped in layers of superstition. The shadow from the west was creeping inland, and the greatest empire the Americas had ever known was about to face a challenge for which it was utterly unprepared. The age of Inca supremacy was drawing to a close, and a new, brutal chapter of history was about to begin. Thank you so much for joining me for this part of the story. The events that follow are some of the most dramatic and tragic in world history. If you found this chapter compelling, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next chapter. Welcome back to our series on the Inca Empire. Today, we're diving into the dramatic and tragic final chapter of Inca military power. The year 1533, a year that saw a mighty empire brought to its knees. This is the story of how conquest led to collapse. Imagine this. A vast, sophisticated empire, stretching thousands of miles along the Andes, with a complex social structure, incredible architectural achievements, and a powerful military. Yet, in what seems like the blink of an eye, it all came crashing down. How did this happen? The story is more complex than you might think. It's not just about a handful of Spanish conquistadors with superior weapons. It's a story of internal strife, of a brutal civil war that left the empire vulnerable at its most critical moment. At the heart of this storm were two brothers, Huáscar and Atahualpa, sons of the great Inca Emperor Huayna Capac. When their father died, instead of a smooth succession, the empire was plunged into a devastating war of brothers. Huáscar was the legitimate heir in the capital city of Cusco, while Atahualpa, a brilliant and ruthless general, commanded a massive, battle-hardened army in the northern territories, near modern-day Quito. For years, they fought a bitter and bloody conflict that tore the very fabric of the empire apart. Hundreds of thousands perished, resources were drained, and the unity that had made the Inca so strong was shattered. Just as Atahualpa finally defeated his brother's forces and was consolidating his power, a new, unforeseen threat appeared on the horizon. Francisco Pizarro and his small band of Spanish adventurers had landed on the coast. They were few in number, but they arrived at a moment of supreme weakness for the Inca. Think of it like a body that has just fought off a terrible disease, only to be exposed to a new, lethal virus. The Inca Empire was exhausted, wounded, and divided. Atahualpa, flush with victory over his brother, likely underestimated the newcomers. He agreed to meet Pizarro in the city of Cajamarca. It was a fateful decision. Atahualpa arrived with a grand procession, surrounded by thousands of his retainers, largely unarmed as a show of divine authority. He was the Topa Inca, the living god, confident in his power. Pizarro, however, had laid a trap. He had hidden his men, his cavalry, and his primitive but terrifying cannons around the main square. The meeting was a disaster. A Spanish friar presented Atahualpa with a Bible, demanding he convert to Christianity and accept the King of Spain as his sovereign. Atahualpa, who had never seen a book, was confused and angered. He reportedly threw the book to the ground. That was the signal Pizarro was waiting for. The Spanish sprang their ambush. Cannons roared, muskets fired, and armored horsemen charged into the panicked, unarmed Inca crowd. It was a massacre. In the chaos, Pizarro himself fought his way through the crowd and seized Atahualpa, the divine emperor. The capture of Atahualpa was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. The entire Inca command structure revolved around the Topa Inca. With their god king a prisoner, the massive Inca armies that surrounded Cajamarca were paralyzed with indecision. They had the numbers to wipe out the Spanish, but without an order from their divine leader, Te-Weri-Lost. Atahualpa had spent his life commanding men, but now his own authority was being used against him. In a desperate bid for freedom, Atahualpa made an incredible offer. the famous ransom room. He promised to fill a large room once with gold and twice with silver in exchange for his release. The Spanish, driven by an insatiable lust for wealth, eagerly agreed. For months, a river of treasure flowed into Cajamarca from all corners of the empire. Temples were stripped of their golden plates and precious artifacts, the culmination of centuries of Inca art and culture. Where it gathered, the sheer volume of wealth was staggering, beyond anything the Europeans had ever imagined. But Pizarro never intended to let Atahualpa go. The Inca emperor was too powerful, too influential, and too dangerous to be left alive. The Spanish melted down the priceless artifacts into crude ingots, destroying a priceless cultural heritage for its raw material value. Then, after collecting the ransom, they put Atahualpa on trial. The charges were absurd: idolatry, treason against the Spanish, and the murder of his brother Huáscar, who had been executed on Atahualpa's orders while he was in captivity. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Atahualpa was sentenced to be burned at the stake. In a final, cruel twist, the Spanish offered him a more merciful death by strangulation if he converted to Christianity. For Inca, who believed in mummification and the preservation of the body for the afterlife, being burned was the ultimate horror. In his final moments, to preserve his body, Atahualpa agreed to be baptized. And so, on July 26, 1533, the last great emperor of the Inca was executed by the very men he had tried to ransom himself from. The death of Atahualpa marked the end of an era. It was the moment the imperial expansion of the Inca definitively stopped and the collapse began. The conquest wasn't a single event, but a process kick-started by this act. With the empire's leadership decapitated, Pizarro could install a puppet emperor in March on the capital, Cusco. He skillfully exploited the existing political fractures, siding with factions that had been loyal to the defeated Huáscar, and who saw the Spanish as liberators from Atahualpa's rule. The internal wars that had weakened the empire now enabled its foreign conquest. So, when we look at the fall of the Inca, we see that it wasn't just about steel swords and horses. It was a perfect storm of internal division, unfortunate timing, and cultural misunderstanding, all exploited with ruthless efficiency by a small group of determined conquistadors. The Civil War had created the wound, and the Spanish were the infection that proved fatal. The final chapter of Inca military power wasn't a glorious last stand, but a tragic story of an empire turning on itself, paving the way for its own destruction. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the collapse of the Inca Empire. It's a powerful lesson from history about how internal division can be the greatest threat of all. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next episode. We have so many more stories to tell. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to our journey through history. In this final chapter, we explore the enduring legacy of the Inca Empire and the wars that defined its end. What remains of this once mighty civilization, and what lessons can we draw from its dramatic rise and fall? Let's delve into the legacy of the Inca Wars. Even centuries after the Spanish conquest, the physical footprint of the Inca Empire is unmistakable across the Andean landscape. The most iconic of these are the Inca roads, the Capac. This vast network, stretching over 24,000 miles, was the circulatory system of the empire, a marvel of engineering that stitched together deserts, mountains, and jungles. These weren't just simple paths. They were paved, equipped with drainage systems, and featured suspension bridges that spanned terrifying chasms. Even today, portions of these ancient highways are still in use by local communities, a testament to their incredible durability. They stand as silent witnesses to the armies, messengers, and merchants who once traversed them, connecting a sprawling and diverse realm. Equally impressive are the agricultural terraces, or andines, that climb the steep mountain slopes like giant green staircases. These weren't just for farming. They were sophisticated systems for soil conservation and water management, creating microclimates that allowed the Incas to cultivate a variety of crops, from potatoes to maize, at different altitudes. This ingenuity transformed inhospitable terrain into a breadbasket, feeding millions. Today, many of these terraces are still farmed, continuing a tradition of sustainable agriculture that is thousands of years old. When you see these structures, you're not just looking at old ruins. You're seeing a living legacy of ecological wisdom, a solution to food security that remains relevant in our own time. Beyond the stone and soil, the legacy of the Incas lives on in the vibrant traditions of the Andean people. The Quechua language, the lingua franca of the empire, is still spoken by millions from Colombia to Argentina. It's a living link to the past, carrying with it a unique worldview and a rich oral history. We also see Inca influence in textile weaving. The intricate patterns and brilliant colors of Andean fabrics are not merely decorative. They are a form of storytelling, with symbols that can represent social status, community identity, and cosmological beliefs. These textiles are a direct continuation of an art form that the Incas prized above almost all else. Similarly, many religious festivals and community practices today are a syncretic blend of Catholic and indigenous beliefs. The celebration of Inti Raymi, the Festival of the Sun, has been revived in Cusco and is a powerful expression of cultural pride and continuity, connecting modern Andean people directly to their imperial ancestors. These are not relics. They are pulsating, living traditions. The Spanish conquest was a cataclysmic event that fundamentally reshaped Andean identity. Before the conquest, a person's identity was tied to their local alu, or community, and then to the broader Inca state. The arrival of the Spanish created a new, stark division: the colonizer and the colonized. Suddenly, diverse groups, like the Chachapoy, the Huanca, and the Cusco Inca, were all lumped together under the single label of Indio, or Indiana. This forced homogenization had a profound and lasting impact. In the centuries that followed, Andean identity became a complex tapestry woven with threads of resistance, adaptation, and survival. It was forged in the crucible of colonial oppression, creating a shared experience of marginalization, but also a powerful sense of collective resilience. This shared history of conquest gave rise to a new Pan-Andean consciousness. While local identities remained strong, there was a growing recognition of a common heritage and a common struggle. Figures like Tupac Amaru II, who led a massive rebellion in the late 18th century, didn't just fight for one group. He invoked the name of the last Inca emperor to unite a broad coalition of indigenous peoples against colonial rule. His rebellion, though ultimately unsuccessful, ignited a sense of shared purpose that transcended old rivalries. It demonstrated that the memory of the Inca Empire could be a powerful tool for mobilization and a symbol of a future free from foreign domination. This legacy of resistance continues to shape political and social movements in the Andes today, as communities draw strength from their shared history to fight for their rights, land, and cultural preservation. So, what are the ultimate lessons from the Inca story? First is the incredible power of unity and infrastructure. The Incas showed how a centralized vision, when combined with brilliant engineering and administration, could unite a vast and diverse territory. The roads, the storehouses, the standardized language, all were tools for creating a cohesive whole out of disparate parts. The empire's ability to mobilize labor for massive public works projects, like building Sacsayhuaman or the terraces of the Sacred Valley, is a lesson in the power of collective action. They demonstrated that with organization and a shared purpose, human beings can literally move mountains. But the Inca story is also a cautionary tale about the perils of overreach and internal division. The empire's rapid expansion stretched its resources and administrative capacity to the limit. It incorporated many peoples who never fully bought into the Inca project, creating resentments that the Spanish would later exploit. The fatal flaw, however, was the civil war between Huáscar and Atahualpa. This conflict tore the empire apart from within, leaving it critically vulnerable at the precise moment the Spanish arrived. It's a timeless lesson. A house divided against itself cannot stand. The Inca's internal strife was the crack in the armor that allowed a small group of invaders to topple a civilization of millions. It reminds us that the greatest threats often come not from external enemies, but from internal discord. And so, we come to a gentle reflection on the rise and fall of this remarkable empire. Like all great empires in history, Roman, Persian, Ottoman, Inca Empire, or Tawantinsuyu, was a fleeting moment in the grand sweep of time. It rose with astonishing speed, a brilliant flash of light in the Andean highlands. For a century, it shone with unparalleled organization, ambition, and cultural richness. And then, just as quickly, it was extinguished. Its story is a poignant reminder of the impermanence of power and the cyclical nature of history. Civilizations rise, they flourish, and they eventually fall. giving way to new realities. But to say it fell is not the whole story. The Inca Empire wasn't simply erased. It was shattered, but its fragments were absorbed, transformed, and woven into the fabric of a new world. Its legacy is not found only in the silent stones of Machu Picchu or the gold artifacts in a museum. It's in the Quechua words spoken in a mountain village, in the patterns of a woman's shawl, in the taste of potatoes grown on an ancient terrace, and in the resilient spirit of the Andean people who carry the memory of their ancestors forward. The Inca story teaches us that while empires may crumble, cultures endure. The sun of the Incas may have set, but its light continues to refract in a million different ways, illuminating the path for generations to come. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the history of the Inca Empire and its wars. It's a story of genius, conflict, and breathtaking resilience that continues to captivate and inspire us. If you've enjoyed this series, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support makes this all possible. Thanks for watching. Imagine a world cradled by giants, where snow-capped peaks pierce the sky and steep valleys shelter life in 1,000 hidden pockets. This is the Andes, but not the Andes of grand empires and golden cities we often picture. This is a quieter, older world. A time before the name Inca echoed through these mountains. Before the rise of a unified empire, this vast, vertical landscape was a mosaic of countless peoples, each with their own story, their own gods, and their own way of life. Let's journey back to this pre-Inca era, around the 13th and 14th centuries. Forget the idea of a single, sprawling nation. Instead, picture hundreds of independent communities, or alas, scattered across the highlands and coastal plains. From the Chima Kingdom in the north, with their intricate metalwork and sprawling adobe city of Chancham, to the Amharic-speaking kingdoms clustered around the shimmering waters of Lake Titicaca. The Andes were a tapestry of cultures. These weren't isolated tribes. They were sophisticated societies, connected by ancient trade routes that snaked through the mountains like veins, carrying goods, ideas, and sometimes conflict. In a village nestled high in a mountain valley, life moved to a rhythm dictated by the sun, the moon, and the seasons. The day began early, with the crisp mountain air filling your lungs. For the people here, the land wasn't just a resource, it was a living entity. The mountains themselves, the Apis, were powerful deities, ancient guardians who watched over them. Every stream, every rock, had its own spirit. A waka, a sacred place or object that connected the physical world to the spiritual realm. The heart of the community was agriculture, but this was no ordinary farming. On these steep slopes, innovation was survival. The people terraced the mountainsides, creating giant green staircases called andines that transformed impossible terrain into fertile fields. They were masters of their environment, understanding the nuances of altitude, soil, and microclimates. At one level, they grew potatoes, a staple crop that existed in hundreds of varieties. Higher up, you might find quinoa, the supergrain of the Andes. And in the lower, warmer valleys, they cultivated maize, or corn, which was not just food, but a sacred crop used in ceremonies and to brew chicha, a fermented drink central to social and religious life. This vertical archipelago system, as scholars call it, allowed a single community to access the products of different ecological zones, ensuring their resilience. Leadership in these communities was local and deeply personal. At the head of the Elu was the Caraca, a chief or leader who wasn't a distant king, but a respected elder, a community organizer, and a spiritual guide. The Caraca was responsible for organizing agricultural work, settling disputes, and most importantly, maintaining the proper relationship between the people and the spiritual world. They led the rituals and ceremonies that marked the agricultural calendar, making offerings of coca leaves and chicha to Pachamama, the Earth Mother, to ensure her continued benevolence and a bountiful harvest. Life was based on a principle of reciprocity called Aini. It was a system of mutual help. Today, I help you build your house. Tomorrow, you help me harvest my fields. This spirit of cooperation was the glue that held society together. Spirituality wasn't confined to a temple. It was woven into the fabric of everyday existence. The cosmos was a living, breathing entity. The sun god, Inti, and the moon goddess, Mama Kila, governed the cycles of time. The people of the Andes were keen astronomers. Their calendars and ceremonies aligned with celestial events like solstices and equinoxes. They believed in a world after this one, and the veneration of ancestors was profoundly important. The mummies of their deceased leaders were not seen as dead, but as living presences, consulted for advice, and honored during important festivals. These mummies were tangible links to the past and guardians of the future. But this peaceful rhythm of life wasn't without its tensions. The Andean landscape, while beautiful, was challenging. Droughts, floods, and frosts were constant threats, and while cooperation was the ideal, competition was a reality. Different ethnic groups and kingdoms vied for control of fertile land, water sources, and vital trade routes. Fortified hilltop settlements, or pucaras, stand as silent testaments to an era where skirmishes and raids were a part of life. Local leaders would forge alliances, engage in ritual battles, and compete for prestige and power. It was a world of shifting allegiances, where a strong community one day might be a vassal the next. Yet, these conflicts were typically localized, part of the dynamic ebb and flow of power in the highlands, not the systematic conquest of a massive empire. Imagine standing on a high pass, the wind whipping past you. Below, you see the patchwork of fields, the smoke rising from the thatched roofs of a small village, and the llama caravans moving slowly along a narrow trail. In the distance, the sacred peaks, the Apus, stand silent and eternal, their snowy heads cloaked in clouds. This is the world as it was, a land of incredible diversity, deep spiritual connection, and remarkable human ingenuity. It was a land of 100 different peoples, 100 different voices. It was a land at rest, a world in balance, and aware of the small, ambitious tribe growing in a valley to the south. A tribe from a place called Cusco, a tribe that would soon call themselves the Children of the Sun, the Inca, and who would forever change the destiny of this quiet, magnificent world. This pre-Inca landscape is not just a prelude to a more famous story. It's a rich and complex world in its own right. Understanding this foundation of local cultures, spiritual beliefs, and agricultural mastery is the key to truly understanding the incredible empire that was to come. It was upon this ancient bedrock that the Inca would build their vast domain, not by erasing what came before, but by absorbing, adapting, and magnifying the traditions of the Andean people. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this glimpse into the ancient Andes fascinating, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We have so much more to explore together. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter, where we'll witness the humble origins of the Inca and the legendary rise of their empire. See you next time. Welcome back to our journey into the heart of the Andes. Last time, we set the stage for the rise of a colossal empire. But before the Inca were masters of a realm stretching thousands of miles, they were something much smaller, much more vulnerable. This is the story of Cusco, a small kingdom in the highlands, and the origins of a people who would one day claim divinity. Forget the sprawling empire for a moment. Picture this instead, a high-altitude valley, nestled among towering peaks. Here, numerous small groups and tribes coexist, each with its own chief, its own customs, and its own ambitions. They trade, they intermarry, but they also fight. For land, for water, for llamas, for sheer survival. Among these groups were the people who would become the Inca. In these early days, they were not exceptional. They were just one tribe among many, struggling to carve out a place for themselves in a competitive and often hostile world. Their home, the settlement of Cusco, wasn't a grand imperial capital. It was a modest city-state, a small collection of stone and thatch buildings, surrounded by powerful and aggressive neighbors. Groups like the Huayna and the Pinagua were constant threats, always ready to raid and challenge Cusco's fragile existence. Life was precarious. A failed harvest, a lost battle, a weak leader. Any of these could have meant the end of the Inca people, their name forgotten, absorbed by a rival, and lost to history. This constant state of vulnerability was the crucible that forged the Inca mindset. It instilled in them a deep-seated need for security, a drive for order, and a relentless ambition that would later fuel their incredible expansion. But where did these people come from? Like all great civilizations, the Incas wrapped their origins in sacred myth. The most famous story tells of the sun god Inti, who looked down upon the chaotic world of mortals and felt pity. He sent his son, Manco Capac, and his daughter, Mama Aclo, to bring order and civilization to humanity. They emerged from the waters of Lake Titicaca, the sacred heart of the Andes. In Manco Capac's hand was a golden staff. Inti's instruction was simple: travel until you find a place where the staff sinks effortlessly into the earth. That will be the chosen spot, the place to build your city. Manco Capac and Mama Oclo journeyed north, testing the ground as they went. They taught the scattered peoples. They met the arts of farming, weaving, and building. Finally, after a long trek, they arrived in a fertile valley. Manco Capac raised the golden staff, and it slid smoothly into the rich soil, disappearing completely. This was the sign. Here, they founded their city, Cusco, which in their language meant the navel of the earth. Manco Capac became the first king. Topa Inca and established the laws and religious rites that would govern his people for generations. Mama Oclo taught the women the skills of weaving textiles and managing the household, establishing the social roles that would define their society. This story is more than just a charming legend. It was a powerful political statement. It established the Inca rulers as direct descendants of the sun god, giving them a divine right to rule not just Cusco, but all the peoples of the Andes. It positioned Cusco as the center of the cosmos, the axis mundi from which civilization emanated. By claiming a sacred origin, the Incas distinguished themselves from their rivals. They weren't just another tribe. They were a chosen people with a divine destiny. Now, how much of this is history and how much is myth? Archaeologists and historians have a different perspective. Evidence suggests that the people who founded Cusco were likely migrants, perhaps fleeing instability around Lake Titicaca or other regions. They arrived in the Cusco Valley around the 12th century, found it to be a strategic and fertile location, and established a settlement. They were likely a well-organized group, perhaps with a strong military leader who later became mythologized as the figure of Manco Capac. The story of the golden staff sinking into the ground could be a symbolic representation of the valley's fertility and its suitability for agriculture, particularly maize, which became a staple of the Inca diet and a key element in their economy and rituals. The early Inca rulers, the successors of the legendary Manco Capac, were not emperors. They were more like warrior chiefs, leaders of a small kingdom engaged in a constant power struggle. Their reigns were filled with local skirmishes, strategic alliances often sealed by marriage, and a slow, gradual consolidation of power around the Cusco Valley. They built fortifications, developed irrigation systems, and laid the institutional groundwork that would be crucial for their later expansion. Each successive ruler added a little more territory, a little more influence. Think of it like a game of chess played over generations. The board was the Andean landscape, and the pieces were tribes, resources, and strategic alliances. The early Inca were not playing for world domination. They were playing for survival. Every decision was weighed against the threat of their neighbors. The Ayarmaca, in particular, were a persistent thorn in their side. Historical accounts, passed down orally and later recorded by the Spanish, are filled with stories of battles, kidnappings of royal heirs, and betrayals between the Inca and their rivals. This environment bred a culture of discipline, military prowess, and shrewd diplomacy. They learned to exploit divisions among their enemies, to form temporary alliances, and to be absolutely ruthless when necessary. This constant pressure to survive, this feeling of being an underdog surrounded by wolves, is key to understanding the Inca psyche. It explains their later obsession with control, their hierarchical social structure, and their almost paranoid need for order. Their empire wasn't born from a position of strength, but from a deep-seated memory of weakness. They knew what it was like to be on the brink of annihilation, and they were determined never to be in that position again. So, the first few hundred years of Inca history were not a tale of grand conquests. but of gritty survival. It's the story of a small, ambitious group in the Cusco Valley, led by a dynasty that cleverly blended myth and reality to justify its rule. They used a powerful origin story to build a collective identity and a sense of destiny, while on the ground, they fought, negotiated, and built their way from a vulnerable city-state into a regional power. They were laying the foundation, stone by stone, for the incredible explosion that was to come. They didn't know they were building an empire. They were simply trying to ensure that their people, their city, and their way of life would endure into the next day. This formative period of struggle and consolidation is absolutely essential. Without understanding the humble and dangerous beginnings of the Inca and their small highland kingdom, their subsequent meteoric rise to imperial glory seems almost inexplicable. It was in the shadow of their rivals, in the fight for their very existence, that the seeds of empire were truly sown. Join us next time as we witness the pivotal moment when everything changes. We Alel meet the ruler who transforms Cusco from a small kingdom into a voracious empire and sets the Inca on a path of unstoppable conquest. The age of empire is about to begin. Thanks for watching, and if you're enjoying this deep dive into history, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. See you then. Hello and welcome back to our series on the Inca Empire. Last time, we explored the foundations of Cusco and the early reigns of the Topa Incas. Today, we plunge into a period of existential crisis, a moment when the Inca world teetered on the brink of annihilation. This is the story of the Chenca Confederation and their terrifying war against the heart of the Inca realm. Imagine a power, not unlike the early Incas, but forged in a different fire. These were the Chenca, a fierce confederation of peoples from the Andahuaylas region to the west of Cusco. For generations, they had been expanding, their military reputation growing with every victory. They were not just raiders. They were a disciplined, organized, and ruthless force, believed to be descended from the puma, a sacred and powerful predator of the Andes. Their ambition was boundless, and their eyes were now fixed on the ultimate prize: the fertile Cusco Valley and the destruction of their primary rivals, the Incas. By the early 15th century, the Chenca were more than just a distant threat. They were a storm gathering on the horizon. Led by powerful warlords like Hanco Hulu and Estoy Huaraca, their armies had systematically conquered the lands between their homeland and Inca territory. Each victory brought them closer, their reputation preceding them like a wave of fear. Stories of their ferocity and the sheer size of their armies spread through the highlands, reaching the ears of the Inca elite in Cusco. For the Incas, who had spent decades consolidating their own small kingdom, the Chenca represented a challenge unlike any they had ever faced. This wasn't just a border skirmish. This was a war for survival. The year is approximately 1438. The Topa Inca is an aging ruler named Huayna Inca. He had seen the Inca state grow, but now he faced its greatest peril. The Chenca leadership, confident in their strength, issued an ultimatum. They demanded Cusco's complete surrender. The choice was simple: submit and become vassals, or face total destruction. The tension in the capital must have been unbearable. The Chenca army, said to number in the tens of thousands, was on the march, a relentless tide of warriors sweeping across the plains. Their destination, clear: Cusco, the navel of the world, was about to be besieged. As the enemy advanced, panic and despair gripped the Inca leadership. The situation seemed hopeless. The Chenca army vastly outnumbered Cusco's defenders. Faced with what he believed was certain defeat, Topa Inca Yupanqui made a shocking decision. Along with his chosen heir, Inca Erko, he abandoned the capital. He fled with his court to the safety of a mountain fortress, leaving Cusco and its people to their fate. This was more than a strategic retreat. It was a complete political collapse. The head of the state had deserted his post. The chain of command was broken, and the city was left leaderless, defenseless, and terrified. Priests offered desperate sacrifices, but the gods seemed silent. The people watched the royal procession leave, their hearts sinking with the setting sun. The end of the Inca world seemed not just possible, but imminent. But in the darkest of hours, heroes are often forged. While the king and his heir fled, one of Huayna's other sons, Huayna Capac, refused to leave. He was not the chosen successor, and by some accounts, He was overlooked and disregarded by his father. Yet, he possessed a resolve that the ruling elite lacked. He declared that he would stay and defend the sacred city, that he would not abandon the sun god Inti, and that he would rather die defending his home than flee in disgrace. He began to rally the few warriors and citizens who remained, his voice a beacon of defiance in a city consumed by fear. He sent out desperate pleas for help to the surrounding allied communities. But many, seeing the Inca leadership in disarray, refused to commit their forces to a lost cause. Cusco Yupanqui and his small band of loyalists were truly alone. As the Inca army appeared on the hills overlooking Cusco, the scene was set for a final, desperate battle. The invaders were confident, their banners filling the horizon. They expected to march into a deserted city or face a token resistance before sacking it. Inside the city walls, Cusco Yupanqui prepared his meager defenses. He placed loyal soldiers at every entrance and armed ordinary citizens, turning farmers and artisans into last-ditch defenders. According to legend, as he prayed for aid, he had a vision. The creator god Viracocha appeared to him, promising victory and a glorious future. Bolstered by this divine encounter, Cusco Yupanqui addressed his followers, inspiring them with a courage born of desperation. He told them that even the stones on the battlefield would rise up to fight alongside them. The battle for Cusco was ferocious. The Inca threw themselves at the city, expecting a quick victory, but were met with a defense of unbelievable intensity. Cusco Yupanqui was everywhere, fighting on the front lines, a whirlwind of martial prowess and charismatic leadership. The Inca defenders, inspired by his example, fought with the strength of 10 men. The legend of the stone warriors, the Purarocas, was born in this battle. It was said that as the fighting reached its climax, the very stones of the battlefield transformed into Inca soldiers, joining the fray and turning the tide against the bewildered Chancas. Whether this was a myth created to explain a miraculous victory or a genuine belief that inspired the warriors to impossible feats, the effect was the same. The Inca assault faltered, their lines broke, and their confident advance turned into a panicked retreat. Cusco Yupanqui did not stop at simply defending the city. He led his forces in a relentless pursuit of the fleeing Inca army. He chased them across the plain, inflicting a devastating defeat and capturing their sacred idols and leaders. The victory was absolute and shocking. The seemingly invincible Inca Confederation was not just defeated, it was shattered. When news of the miraculous victory reached Viracocha Inca in his fortress, he was stunned. But his pride and jealousy prevented him from recognizing his son's achievement. He even attempted to have Cusco Yupanqui assassinated, hoping to secure the throne for his favored son, Inca Urco. But this plot failed. The returning army, the priests, and the people of Cusco hailed Cusco Yupanqui as their true savior and leader. This singular event, the defense of Cusco against all odds, was the great turning point in Inca history. It was the moment a small regional kingdom was reborn into a powerful empire. Cusco Yupanqui, the forgotten prince, had proven his worth not just as a warrior, but as a leader chosen by the gods. He deposed his father and his brother, and he took the title that would echo through history, Pachacuti, which means he who remakes the world or earthshaker. And shake the earth he did. The Inca threat was not just neutralized, their territory and their people were absorbed into a new, rapidly expanding state. The victory provided the Incas with a massive new pool of manpower and resources, and it sent a clear message to all other regional powers. A new force had arrived in the Andes. The age of the Inca Empire had truly begun. Join us next time as we explore the reign of the great Pachacuti, the visionary architect of the Inca Empire. We'll see how he transformed a near defeat into the foundation for one of the most incredible civilizations in world history. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter of our journey. Welcome back to our series on the great empires of history. Today, we're diving into Chapter 4, focusing on one of the most transformative leaders the world has ever known, Pachacuti, the world changer. Imagine a kingdom on the brink of total annihilation, its capital under siege, its king and heir fleeing in terror. This was the dire situation of the Inca kingdom of Cusco, around the year 1438. But from the ashes of this impending disaster, a hero emerged, a prince who refused to surrender. This is the story of Pachacuti, Inca Yupanqui. Before he was the great emperor, he was known as Cusco Yupanqui, a younger son of the Inca ruler Viro. He wasn't the chosen heir. That title belonged to his brother, Inca Erco, but when the formidable Chonca people, a rival ethnic group from the highlands, launched a massive invasion, the course of history was forever altered. The Chonca army was relentless, sweeping through Inca territory and laying siege to the capital city of Cusco. Faced with overwhelming odds, King Viracaca and his heir, Inca Erco, made a fateful decision. They abandoned the city, believing it was lost. They fled to a fortress in the mountains, leaving their people to face the wrath of the Chonca invaders. It seemed like the end of the Inca world, but not everyone fled. Cusco Yupanqui remained. He refused to abandon his home and his people. According to Inca oral traditions, he had a vision of the sun god Inti, who promised him victory and assured him that he was destined for greatness. Inspired by this divine message, Cusco Yupanqui rallied the few remaining warriors and generals in Cusco. He organized a desperate last-ditch defense of the city. He was not just a prince. He was now the sole beacon of hope for a kingdom on the verge of extinction. His courage was contagious. He appealed to the neighboring tribes who had previously been hesitant to ally with the Incas, asking for their help against the common Chonca threat. The battle for Cusco was ferocious. The Chonca warriors, confident in their numbers, swarmed the city's defenses. But Cusco Yupanqui and his small, determined force fought with the ferocity of those with nothing left to lose. Legend has it that the very stones on the battlefield, the pure, rose up and transformed into warriors to fight alongside the Incas. While this is likely a mythical embellishment, it speaks volumes about the incredible, seemingly miraculous nature of their victory. Against all expectations, the Incas, led by the steadfast Cusco Yupanqui, repelled the Chonca assault. They not only defended Cusco but pushed the Chonca forces back in a stunning counterattack. This victory wasn't just a military triumph, it was a profound turning point. Cusco Yupanqui pursued the retreating Chonca army, ultimately crushing them in a decisive final battle. He returned to Cusco not just as a hero, but as the undisputed savior of his people. His father, Viracaca, even after the victory, tried to pass the throne to the cowardly Inca Erco, but the people and the nobility would have none of it. They recognized their true leader. Cusco Yupanqui, through his bravery and leadership, had proven his worthiness. He was crowned the new Topa Inca, the one and only emperor. Upon ascending the throne, he took a new name, a name that would echo through the Andes for centuries. Pachacuti, in the Quechua language, Pacha means time or space, or the world, and Cuti means to turn or to overturn. So, his name literally translates to he who overturns space and time, or more simply world shaker or earth changer. This wasn't just a title. It was a declaration of his intent and a reflection of his impact. He had taken a small, threatened kingdom and was about to transform it into the largest empire in the Americas. The name symbolized the monumental shift he had initiated, a complete overturning of the old order and the dawn of a new era. The victory over the Choncas provided Pachacuti with the political capital and military momentum he needed to begin his ambitious project of expansion. The old, decentralized kingdom of Cusco was no more. In its place, Pachacuti began to build a true empire, the Tawantimsu, which means the four parts together. He fundamentally reorganized the Inca state, creating a highly centralized and efficient administrative system. He established a new legal code, rebuilt the city of Cusco as a magnificent imperial capital, and initiated massive construction projects, including the famous fortress of Sacsayhuaman. Many scholars believe the royal estate of Machu Picchu. Pachacuti's reforms touched every aspect of Inca life. He reformed the Inca religion, elevating the sun god Inti to the supreme deity of the state, a move that legitimized his own divine right to rule. He created a system of forced resettlement, known as mitma, moving entire populations to new territories to break old loyalties and better integrate conquered peoples. He also perfected the quipu system, the intricate knotted cords used for record keeping, allowing for meticulous management of the empire's resources, from taxes and tribute to census data. He developed a vast road network that connected the farthest corners of his expanding domain, enabling rapid communication and troop movement. Under Pachacuti's rule, The Inca army became an unstoppable force. Through a combination of brilliant military strategy and shrewd diplomacy, he and his son, Topa Inca Yupanqui, who became his top general, expanded the empire at an unprecedented rate. They conquered vast territories, from the highlands of modern-day Ecuador in the north, down to central Chile and Argentina in the south. Within a single generation, Pachacuti transformed a small regional kingdom into a sprawling, multi-ethnic empire that stretched for thousands of miles. Along the Andes Mountains, he was not just a conqueror. He was an empire builder, a visionary who laid the foundations for a century of Inca dominance. The legacy of Pachacuti is immeasurable. He is to the Incas what Alexander the Great was to the Macedonians, or what Augustus was to the Romans. He was the architect of the Inca Empire, the world changer who single-handedly reshaped the political, social, and physical landscape of the Andean world. His story is a powerful testament to how one individual's courage and vision in a moment of crises can alter the course of history. From a prince defending a city in ruins, he rose to become the emperor of a golden age, leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and inspire us to this day. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the life of the incredible Pachacuti. His reign truly marks the beginning of the Inca Empire as we know it. In our next chapter, we'll explore the reigns of his successors and the continued expansion that brought the empire to its absolute zenith. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And do you want to forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Welcome back to our series on the Inca Empire. Last time, we witnessed the dramatic rise of a young prince who would become Pachacuti, the Earthshaker. Today, in Chapter 5, we explore how he didn't just win a war, he forged an empire. This is the story of the birth of an imperial vision. Before Pachacuti, the Inca were a regional power, one among many in the Andes. But after his legendary defense of Cusco against the Xanca, everything changed. Pachacuti wasn't content with just being a king. He envisioned something far grander. He looked at the scattered chiefdoms and saw the potential for a unified, centrally controlled state. His first order of business was a complete reorganization of Inca society, a revolution from the top down. This wasn't just a political shuffle. Pachacuti introduced a concept that would become the spiritual and political backbone of the empire: sacred kingship. He elevated the position of the Topa Inca from a mere warlord to a living god, a direct descendant of the sun god Inti, whose divine status gave him unquestionable authority. His word wasn't just law, it was a divine command. This concept allowed him to implement sweeping changes that would have been impossible otherwise. People weren't just obeying a king, they were serving a god on earth. This solidified his power and laid the ideological groundwork for imperial expansion. With this new authority, Pachacuti turned his attention to the capital Cusco. It was no longer to be just a city. It would be the sacred heart of the empire, the navel of the world. He initiated a massive rebuilding project. Old Cusco was razed and redesigned with incredible precision. The city was laid out in the shape of a puma, a sacred animal symbolizing power and strength. The head of the puma was the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, overlooking the city, its body formed by the confluence of two rivers, and its heart was the Coricancia, the temple of the sun. The Coricancia itself was transformed into a dazzling spectacle. Its walls were said to be lined with sheets of pure gold, reflecting the sun's rays, and solidifying Cusco's status as the home of the sun god Es-Sun. The city was divided into upper and lower halves, Hanan and Hurin Cusco, which mirrored the dualistic structure of Andean cosmology. It was a masterpiece of urban planning, designed to be both a functional administrative center and a powerful religious symbol. Every stone was placed with purpose, turning the city into a living map of the cosmos and the empire itself. But Pachacuti's vision extended far beyond the city walls. He conceived of the empire as Tawantinsuyo, which in Quechua means the four quarters or the four parts together. This was a brilliant organizational and ideological concept. The empire was divided into four great provinces, radiating out from the central point of Cusco. To the northwest was Chinchaysuyo, the most populous and wealthy quarter. To the northeast was Antisuyo, the jungle region of the Amazon. To the southeast was Calasuyo, the vast southern plains, and to the southwest was Kuntisuyu, the smallest quarter, leading to the coast. This division wasn't just for administrative convenience. It was a cosmological model imposed upon the landscape. Each Sioux had its own distinct character, resources, and people, all brought into a unified whole, governed from the center. Representatives from each Sioux resided in Cusco, in the corresponding quarter of the city, creating a microcosm of the entire empire within the capital. This system allowed for efficient administration, resource management, and the movement of armies and information along the vast network of Inca roads that connected the quarters. It gave diverse and distant peoples a place within a single, unified structure, all oriented toward the divine Topa Inca in Cusco. To manage this vast state, Pachacuti implemented a system of centralized planning that was astonishingly sophisticated. He ordered a comprehensive survey of the entire realm, its lands, its peoples, and its resources. This information was recorded on quipu, the intricate knotted cords that served as the Incas' primary data storage system. With this data, the state could effectively plan everything from agricultural production to labor assignments. This led to the institutionalization of the mita system. This wasn't slavery. It was a form of rotational labor tax. Every able-bodied man was required to work for the state for a certain number of days each year. This labor built the roads, the temples, the fortresses, and farmed the state-owned lands. In return, the state provided for the people in times of hardship, distributing food and goods from massive storehouses called kulkas, which were strategically placed throughout the empire. This system of reciprocity, though unequal, ensured the stability and productivity of the state. It was a form of state-sponsored welfare that guaranteed nobody starved, so long as they contributed to the imperial project. Pachacuti's reforms touched every aspect of life. He standardized religion, promoting the cult of Inti across the realm while incorporating local deities into the Inca pantheon. He reformed the calendar, standardized language by promoting Quichua as the lingua franca, and even reorganized the army, turning it into a disciplined and professional fighting force capable of conquering vast territories. He established a class of administrators, the heirs of the Inca, who traveled the empire ensuring his policies were enforced. Through this breathtaking series of reforms, Pachacuti transformed a small kingdom into a sprawling, multi-ethnic empire. His vision was of a perfectly ordered world, managed from a divine center, where every person and every resource was dedicated to the glory of the state and its God. He didn't just conquer lands. He created a system, an ideology, a new world order in the Andes. He was the architect of the Inca Empire, the man who turned a military victory into a lasting imperial legacy. Next time, we'll see how this newly forged imperial machine was put into motion. We'll follow the incredible conquests of Pachacuti and his son, Topa Inca Yupanqui, as they expand the borders of Tawantinsuyu to encompass millions of people and a vast swath of South America. It's a story of military genius, logistical marvels, and the relentless ambition of the Inca. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying this journey into the heart of the Inca world, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter. See you then.